Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
An abandoned wife takes in a street dog. But Cindy didn't know what twist of fate would soon await her. Cindy, what's there to think about? Go away, you're already away from him. The short, pretty girl reached for a bright yellow marmalade and studded with sugar. She sat across from her friend and looked at her with visible pity in her eyes. I don't understand how anyone can tolerate being treated like this, she said, then lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. And I'm sorry, of course, but your Dave is so ugly. She squirmed as if she'd just eaten a whole lemon. Anyway, it's up to you. But if I were you, I'd leave him a long time ago. Cindy thought for a moment. She reached for her cup of tea carefully, and the sipping of the hot drink warmed her body, and she covered her eyes. That's it, I already understand. With annoyance, said at last, Cindy, how am I going to leave him? He'd be lost without me. And then, how can I be alone with 3 kids? It would be crazy. Cindy grabbed my head with both hands. Because your hubby's been a big help to you. Kathy noted caustically. She reached again for the small glass plate of sweets. You can't argue with that. Kathy was as right as ever. Cindy had recently gone through a very difficult labor. 2 wonderful and very cute babies were born. Cindy gave birth to 2 twin girls. Dave, Cindy's husband even before she was pregnant, pushed hard for Cindy to have another baby, but did not help his wife at all with childcare. Maybe he wasn't ready for his wife to have 2 children at once. Or maybe he didn't quite realize the level of new responsibility when he contemplated having another child. Even insisted, rebuked her day and night. What kind of woman are you? Such a family should be normal. And the fact that it's 1 child, you need at least 2. He was pecking her brains out with his reproaches. So she decided to have a second child. Despite the fact that Dave, frankly, wasn't even capable of supporting 1 child. Or maybe it could be anything. Another man's family is another man's convent. Kathy never understood her friend. In any case, there was no answer to that question. Children, on the other hand, were. In addition to the infant twins, Cindy and Dave had another child, their eldest son, Alex. And if in the upbringing of Alex, Dave at least poorly, but helped his wife, then with the twins immediately after the birth, he almost ceased to appear at home. He disappeared more and more often preferred to lie on the couch than to do at least one of his children. The only assistant to Cindy was her grandmother, Lucy. The old lady managed to replace the young mother as dead parents and quite alive and healthy husband. Dave probably didn't quite understand what it was like to be a responsible parent. The couple were the same age, both 36 years old. And if Cindy herself at this age was spinning like a squirrel in a wheel, her husband, undoubtedly, for some time he was making good money. The man had his own small business, several coffee shops. However, as the years went by, the big fast food chains almost drove him out of this market with their tiny eateries. And at home, the father of the family, Dave, for his partners and employees, turned into an infantile boy unable to heat even a bowl of soup on his own, insisting on the birth of another child. Dave probably didn't have time to realize the difficulties that would enter their quiet and measured life. Having a baby was probably no more new to him than buying a new television. Dave didn't realize how difficult it was to raise 3 children at once. He didn't understand how hard it was to carry, to give birth to twins. Maybe he didn't realize it because he hadn't carried children or given birth to them himself. Maybe. In any case, Dave renounced his proud title of head of the family and disappeared more and more, eventually stopping coming home altogether. Kathy sent her palm a centimeter away from the girl's face. I'm asking you, is Dave helping you? What's the holdup? Asked the girl, slightly raising her already thin, squeaky, cool voice. You're right, Cindy replied calmly. He doesn't help me at all. The whole household is on me and my grandmother. But man, how can you leave your husband after 10 years of marriage? I mean, he's like family to me. And that's how Kathy parried me, nice and easy. Or maybe you like carrying 4 people at once. Oh, it's hard, Kathy, Cindy replied sadly. She put the empty cup on the table and started to pack. Thanks for inviting me. But I've got to go. Grandma's probably going crazy without me. It's kind of hard to sit with kids that long at that age. Yeah, come on, said Kathy, not letting go of another marmalade. Well, think about it and give it up already. She shook her hands carelessly and stood up after Cindy to escort her friend out and closed the front door behind her. Cindy, already standing in the doorway, and threw Kathy a suspicious and even mocking look. Kathy, why did you start urging me to dump Dave so often? If you weren't my friend, I'd think you were trying to steal him away from me. Cindy smiled kindly, making it clear that what she'd said was just a friendly joke. Cindy knew her friend well. And her eyes were wet. Kathy laughed nervously. No, she even held like a large and strong horse. She saw her friend off like that, slamming the door so that she almost hit Cindy on her soft spot. Cindy, who was already in the entryway, wondered what was wrong with her today. She asked herself that question and shrugged her shoulders and hurried home. Her friends lived in the same neighborhood. Cindy entered the apartment. "Grandma, I'm home," she shouted. She takes off her boots. Walking inside, she quickly washed her hands and hurried to change. By the time Cindy was on her way out of her bedroom, she was almost knocked off her feet. Running out ran Alex swiftly. "Mommy, Mommy," shouted the boy. Alex had just recently turned 10 years old, and he was absolutely sure that he had become an adult. "Mom, how did you go for a walk?" he asked. "Did you go to Aunt Kathy's?" "Yes." "When is she coming to visit again?" Cindy kissed the boy on the cheek. "Oh, I don't know, honey. Aunt Kathy has been very busy lately. I don't think she'll be able to find time for us." The boy was genuinely surprised, but she'd just been here a little while ago. "I wish she would come again." He began to jump, and with his jumps, he made a few quick circles around his mother. Cindy felt dizzy. "Alex, don't make it up. Aunt Kathy hasn't been here in a long time. So where are your sisters?" "That's not true." The boy frowned his blonde eyebrows. He was about to continue the argument, but then the whole space was filled with a baby cry. Lucy came out into the living room, holding 2 babies in her arms at once. One toddler alone. A toddler can be terribly loud, and too disgruntled Alex closed his ears and ran to his room. "How are you guys doing?" asked Cindy, trying to shout over the cries of the hungry and probably insanely schooled by their mother children. "Good," you shouted back Lucy, handing the babies into the arms of her granddaughter. Cindy took the babies and walked with them to the nursery. She sat down and began to feed the girls, rocking and soothing them. When the babies stopped screaming, she whispered to the grandmother sitting across from her, "Grandma, thank you for sitting with them." The girl's voice was one of sincere gratitude, though she was leaving, let's say, not exactly on important business. Lucy had no problem agreeing to look after her great-grandchildren. Cindy needed a change of scenery. She needed to recharge, to shake things up, to chat with an old friend over a cup of strong tea. It was just right. Lucy had no problem letting her granddaughter go to her friend's house. She could see how tired Cindy was. The old lady nodded nobly. "You're welcome." "Cindy, so how was it? Tell me about it." "Oh, Grandma." Cindy, having already finished feeding, carefully handed the grandmother to one of her daughters. The women got up and started pumping the babies in their arms. "We had a good time. Except Kathy. She's been telling me non-stop lately to dump Dave. I mean, you can imagine the pressure she's putting on me." "Well, Grandma, Dave, who's yours?" "You have to admit, he hasn't been himself lately. He's always disappearing. He doesn't pay any attention to the kids." "No, I don't agree with your Kathy. But still, maybe he shouldn't be abandoned, but he should be rehabilitated." Cindy laughed. "But would you say he's a dog to be rehabilitated?" "Well, maybe not a dog," the old woman thoughtfully stretched out. "But all men are like that. They are only an eye and an eye. Look, they will steal your husband and an eye. You won't have time to lead." Grandma pulled her grandson. "And I won't need such a man." The women downloaded the babies and put them in the crib at the same time. A man who can be led away like a goat on a leash is no longer a man, no longer a husband. At least Lucy good-naturedly giggled. "You're right, granddaughter. You're 100% right." She looked carefully. "Cindy, you're beautiful, young, but so tired and washed out. Her lush, dark curls were gathered into a neat bundle. Dark circles were visible under her bright blue eyes. "How much do you look like your mother?" With sadness in her voice, the old woman remarked. She had lost her daughter Cindy's mom more than 20 years ago. Cindy's parents died in a plane crash. Lucy was left all alone with little Cindy. How hard was it for her then? No support, no advice, not a single and close soul by her side. The woman left the nursery and headed for the kitchen. Cindy continued the conversation. "By the way, Dave's been showing up in my absence." "Careful?" the girl asked. The old woman shook her head languidly. "No, the children and I haven't seen him." Cindy was visibly upset, but tried not to give the appearance of attentive Lucy. She understood without a word. "But Cindy, don't be upset. Maybe he was working late. Anything can happen." Cindy tried to squeeze out a smile, but it didn't come out well. She started to heat up the dinner her grandmother had already prepared to feed the eldest child. "But it's getting late. Why don't you stay with us?" Grandma shook her head. "There's more." She laughed. "No, I'm going home. Nancy's still waiting for me." Cindy smiled at Nancy. So the old woman lived not far from Cindy. All alone. But if you didn't count the little new-from-age lid as a tenant. Nancy, well, if Nancy's waiting. Then run along, the old lady jokingly bent over. "Thank you, mistress, tomorrow not." She, chuckling, left the kitchen. Cindy was left alone. To be honest, after the twins were born, she'd been hit by a real postpartum depression. And in those rare moments when she was alone, her eyes immediately began to sting with tears and the air felt like it was getting smaller and smaller. Cindy closed her eyes, tried to pull herself together. She breathed deeply, trying to hold back the sudden tears. Her hands shook. A rope seemed to be thrown around her throat, trying to strangle the poor girl. Suddenly there was a longing, a pain, and an anguish that was incommensurate with the reality of the situation. Why is all this happening to me? With vexation and longing, Cindy asked herself. She didn't know what it was that made her so upset, but she couldn't regain her composure. Cindy burst into tears, unable to figure out what was driving her to such a state. Maybe hormones. In a minute, she was literally sobbing with her hand over her mouth. At that moment, the door to the kitchen opened and Cindy's husband, Dave, appeared on the doorstep. "Cindy," he looked perplexed at his wife. "What's wrong with you?" And almost indifferently. Walked past his wife, opened the refrigerator, took out a can of beer from there. The can opened with a little singing, took a couple sips. "Hey, Cindy, I'm talking to you or the closet." But the woman couldn't stop the flow of unsolicited tears. When she managed to pull herself together a little, she slowly turned her big, weeping eyes to her husband. "Where have you been?" In a cold tone, she asked. Where? Dave said thoughtfully, taking a big sip of beer. "At work, of course." "What do you care anyway?" "What do you mean?" Cindy was genuinely surprised. She took out another plate so that she could feed not only her son but also her husband dinner. "Actually, I'm your wife. Don't I have a right to know where my husband disappears to?" Dave was silent in response. When Cindy placed a steaming plate of rogue in front of him, he immediately began to silently reduce the food. Cindy about the porridge was pouring and carefully said 5. "Call Alex for dinner, please. Call him yourself," snarled the man. "Don't you see, I'm tired at work. I'll be running around here like a messenger handing out dinner invitations. He's hungry and will come. Actually, I'd like to eat in silence. These kids are getting on my nerves." He didn't finish his sentence, but Cindy already knew what he meant. "Kids what, Dave? What? Got to you?" "Yes," plopped down in his chair, covering his head with his hands. "Is it okay that they're your own kids?" she asked, raising her already angry tone even more. "You wanted younger children so badly. You asked so much. You insisted so much. And then what happened? Did you ever hold the girls in your arms, except in the hospital?" Dave frowned, but didn't answer. Then Cindy continued. "I'm tired. You know, you're tired as a dog. I've got 3 kids to take care of, cleaning, cooking. You're just as much a parent as I am. Do you have to?" "No, you'd have to help me if it weren't for your grandmother." "Speaking of your grandmother," Dave perked up. I crossed paths with her in the driveway. She's gonna be wrong for a long time. Doesn't she have her own place? Cindy laughed. Are you even listening to me? She rose from her chair, stepping closer to her husband. I can't cope. I can't do it alone. I need help. If it wasn't for Grandma, I'm sick of you and your grandmother. Dave got up from the table with a mushroom and a plate. This is how I'm welcomed home. I'm tired after work, and all you can do is piss me off. Let's do it in the bedroom. At least I'll be alone. With these words, the man left the kitchen. Cindy exhaled nervously. She shook her head and went to Alex's room, calling him for dinner. When the boy had finished, he asked his mom, is Dad home yet? Yes, I think I heard his voice. Yes, son. Cindy answered. Why? Why didn't he say hello to me? Asked the worried boy. Lately, he needed the companionship of his father more than ever. Daddy is very tired. Alex, he works to support us. But you work too. The boy argued. Cindy did work, but it was hardly a full-time job, which was something her husband was often pissed off about. Cindy worked part-time at a small online store. She worked from home in customer service, but such work paid very modestly. And now she had no free time to earn money at all. Bank schedule was floating, and the woman was still in the ranks of employees. Well, Alex, I make a lot less money than your father, so it's harder for him. No offense to him, he's just tired. Are you tired too? The boy answered her. But you spend time with me. And he child abruptly got up from the table and ran to his room. When the whole kitchen was cleaned, Alex put to bed, and the younger children once again fed, and once again stand down. Cindy began to get ready for bed. She showered, checked on the girls once more, and both of them strenuously wandered to the bedroom. Dave was already asleep on the floor, trying not to wake him. Quietly lay down next to her as her hand reached for the light switch. That made her heart race and her hand shake even more than usual. She left the light on and shook her husband nervously by the shoulder. Dave, wake up. The young woman shouted, trying not to cry again. Shit. The man jumped up sharply on the spot. He looked at his wife in surprise, then wiped his face with his hands. You are completely out of your mind. Stupid. Dave shouted. I shouldn't have come back. I should have spent the night somewhere else tonight. I didn't doubt you had somewhere else to sleep. Cindy whispered. What's that? She asked with her finger pointing at the man's back. What's puzzled? Asked Dave. He started to twist around awkwardly, but of course he couldn't see his own back. Then he got to his feet and wandered over to the mirror in the corner of their bedroom. And this, he muttered puzzledly. That's exactly what it is. Angrily replied the wife. The thing was that before turning off the bedroom light, Cindy had noticed a long longitudinal scratch on her husband's back. She didn't immediately realize what it was, but after a couple of seconds, a fantasy overtook her mind, cordially, providing pictures of her spouse in the bedroom with another. Yes, Dave had miscalculated when he had gone to bed with his wife's back to him. Cindy repeated her question. What is this? I'm asking you. Well, it's a sore, don't you see? A scratch. Slowly and faintly, the man said, realizing that he had been caught red-handed. Cindy covered her face with her hands, trying not to show the pain she was feeling at that moment. Dave continued to stand at the mirror. He ruffled his hair, shifting from foot to foot. He was silent for a moment, and then his face changed in a flash, and he approached the bed on which Cindy was sitting. His face contorted into an angry grimace. He broke into a shout. Yes, I have a woman enough, shouted he. So from Nanny's radio came the faint reading of children and long ago. And I love her. He continued to shout. It's a good thing you discovered that yourself. I already didn't know how to say and what else to do to make you think of it at last. Cindy clarified at length. Her voice sounded quietly impotent. It seemed as if she were about to faint. Yes, long ago her husband bellowed with renewed vigor. How did you finally wake the children? A deafening shriek of disgruntled babies came from the Nanny radio. I'm sick of all this. He waved his hand toward the radio. Those kids screaming. You're not pretty or Teddy yourself. I can't live like this anymore. But you yourself wanted children so much. His wife answered him in tears. You dreamed of a big family. Then I was wrong. I don't need all this. It's not mine. I'm sick of babies screaming, stinking diapers. I'm sick of my wife running herself ragged. That's why I'm leaving." He resolutely went into his closet, started going through his clothes. At that moment, Alex came into the bedroom. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing?" The boy stood in the doorway and frightenedly dragged at his parents. "Honey." Cindy had no time to calm the child down before she was interrupted by Dave. "Nothing. Go to bed. I'm sick of this. Go back and forth," the man yelled at his own innocent son. "I'm leaving. I have to go on a business trip right away. Shut your mouth," I said, threatening. Shouted he, again, seeing that the child is about to pay in his voice, went out to his room. The last of those cruel words remained hanging in the bedroom. And the cats all choked with left poison, and Dave himself ran out of the bedroom. And after a while from the apartment, the room seemed to be confused by fear. It seemed that the very air in the house abandoned by the father of the family became thicker, that it could be touched if you reached out. "Mom," the boy stretched out frightened. "What's going to happen now?" Cindy was in complete shock. If she hadn't been a mother, she would have burrowed deeper into the blanket and forgotten everything about the world and spent the next week in his arms, only occasionally going to the bathroom or the kitchen. But she had 3 children. Oh God! She slapped herself lightly and got out of bed in a flash, grabbed the boy's hand and rushed to the nursery to calm the cries of Dave the kid. The rest of the night passed restlessly. She managed to calm the screaming girls and her oldest son at the same time. But Cindy was already mired in her own depression. But now that her husband had left them, she just didn't know how to go on. Frightened, lost, abandoned. She was left all alone, with no husband, no support. Of course, even before that, it couldn't be said that Cindy had a strong male shoulder at her side. Rather, it was Helsinki narrow, unreliable shoulder, but at least it was how and on what they will now all exist. Dave did not help his spouse at all in the household, but he brought money into the house, a little and reluctantly, but still. So what's left to do now but rely on alimony? Cindy was crushed by this new and terrible shock. In the morning, when the children had finally settled down and she had not been able to sleep, she decided to call her friend, and there was a long ringing tone. Then, finally, Cindy heard Kathy's voice. "Hello." Apparently, the call had woken her up. "Cindy, are you there? Have you seen what you're doing?" Kathy asked angrily, coming to her senses a little. "Hi. Oh, sorry. It's just that I'm having a brief pause here. Anyway, I've got Dave leaving me," said like a woman cut off. What did Kathy hold out? You could hear her getting out of bed, left on her own. Wow, he left on his own. I caught him cheating. Can you believe my whole back was scratched? I'm in total shock. You know what kind of predatory woman he is. It's like she wanted me to see those marks on purpose. You think so? Kathy stretched out thoughtfully. That's right. Where is he now? Did she perk up? Where did he go? How should I know? Cindy wondered, probably gone to his mistress. What the hell kind of Wolverine is that? What claws? Oh, after embarrassed her friend Kathy just loved to build herself long, brightly colored nails. Cindy herself preferred a neat, modest manicure at least, because with small children it was inconvenient to have long nails, and she simply did not like such a manicure. I'm sorry, you have great nails. No offense, but that was an offhand remark. And his mistress. Oh, who is she? Philosophically, Cindy asked. I'm curious too. Kathy replied sullenly. She made a strange sound. She seemed to want to say something else, but was interrupted. Both girls rang Kathy's doorbell and the phone went silent. Hello, Cindy was scared for her friend. It's almost 500 am. Who's at your door at this hour? You better not open the door, Kathy interjected nonchalantly. You're imagining things. Yeah, I think I heard the doorbell ring. Kathy, don't open the door. I don't know who's bothering you, Cindy repeated. Yeah, okay, I'm sleepy. I'll call you later, Kathy answered and dropped the call. Cindy wondered what Kathy was up to, strange lately. Could it be her new man? Is it affecting her like this? The woman thought to herself, trying to distract herself from her own problems. Lately, Kathy had been talking nonstop to her friend about her new crush, about her man. She could talk about him for hours, forgetting about everything around her. Kathy had never been married, and she had no children. Nor did she have any problems with her job. Cindy's friend was carefree. She lived on the money left to her as an inheritance by her rich aunts, and she had no problems at all. When this last man came into her life, Kathy was overjoyed. She was always talking about him. How sensitive, kind, considerate he was. True, she never introduced her only friend to her chosen one. As a result, that man was nicknamed Mr. X after all. No one but Kathy herself had ever seen him. At first, Cindy resented her friend. She didn't understand why she didn't want them to meet at all. Then she reconciled herself and listened with pleasure to stories about how beautiful that mysterious man was. There are real princes, Cindy thought dreamily. After listening to her friend's story, at first she was even a little envious of Kathy. Such a man, as they say, is worth his weight in gold. And after a while began to suspect that this romantic hero and it all a figment, playing Vasia girlfriend's imagination. And even laughed a little, teased her, but kindly just played along. Another reason to hide the mysterious Mr. X like that. Cindy couldn't imagine. He never visited Cindy that night. She barely dozed off abruptly, as if from a jolt she woke up and ran to the babies in alarm. She fancied they were coughing fearfully, but all was perfectly well. Both the girls and Alex were peacefully consulting in their cribs. Then Cindy went to the bathroom, stood under the hot shower, and tried to forget everything. Dipped herself in the running jets. It helped a little, but not for long. The children woke up. Barely had she just had time to pour herself a cup of coffee. The drink remained untouched, and the day raced at its usual gallop. Washing her, changing her clothes, feeding her, a quick breakfast, a walk during which she wanted to sleep wildly. But as soon as we stopped the stroller and sat down on the bench, the babies would start screaming. I had to walk and walk with them, cutting circles around the deserted morning park. Depression attacked the girl with renewed vigor, and Cindy lost all taste for life. She spent the next couple of weeks as if in troubled waters. And the lost young mother seemed to have no life at all. She existed only in her daily duties as a mother of 3 small children. Although Cindy did not want to admit it even to herself, but somewhere in her heart she hoped that her husband would come to his senses, that he would return, forgetting about his mysterious, as pure mistress, and finally realize that there is nothing in the world more precious than family. Time passed. Cindy was still suffering the same way. And Dave never thought of going back to his family. I mean me, but the kids. Cindy thought to herself. She couldn't believe that he had given up on his family so easily. She didn't understand how he could forget about his children, his own children. Cindy was crazy with worry even when she went grocery shopping at the supermarket, leaving them with their grandmother, wandering between the shelves of bands. There was no way she could stop thinking about the babies, how they were doing, if they were okay. The woman was worried when she didn't see the twins and Alex near her, all in the span of a few hours. And then, lo and behold, there's Dave. Just like that, he's gone. Didn't he think about what it would be like for the girls to grow up without a father? Didn't he think about what it would be like for Alex to see his own dad practically abandon him? Dave was never heard from. He never even called, let alone come over and ask how his kids were doing. Once Cindy had even considered the possibility that something might have happened to the man. But that thought wasn't destined to develop into anything more. 3 weeks later, Cindy was served with a lawsuit to dissolve Dave's marriage. Cindy was divorced while the former spouses were in court. The woman couldn't even bring herself to look in her husband's direction. That's how much it hurt. Dave, on the other hand, also did not look at his ex-wife. Maybe he was ashamed, or maybe he just didn't care about the latter. Either way, the trial went smoothly, without tantrums or tears. At some point, Cindy wanted to throw herself at her ex-husband's feet, to throw herself at him and beg him not to leave them. But she was always a proud woman who knew her own worth. She would have continued to hold her posture proudly if she hadn't heard one important detail. When it came to alimony and the court set the amount to be paid, Cindy simply exploded with indignation. The blood boiled in her ears, echoing the pounding of her own pulse. "What do you mean, minimum payments?" Terrified, she asked. "Dave is unemployed. He doesn't have the ability to pay the larger amount, so the court is ordering a minimum alimony payment." Her ex-spouse's representative replied in a calm tone. "What do you mean he's unemployed?" "He's self-employed." Cindy exploded in a frenzy. "He has a successful business in his coffee shops daily and earns over $1,000 in revenue." She turned to screaming. She was shaking with resentment and with anger. How would she be able to support the children alone? He's their father. Her hands shook. Her whole body went floppy, nasty. "Then my business went under." Calmly, and she thought, mockingly, Dave said, "I don't have a lot of money to support 3 kids right now." And he added quietly, leaning toward her and smiling smoothly, "You'll have to figure it out on your own. You gave birth to them." Cindy lost all self-control. "And you had no part in the birth of those children?" "Yes," she asked. In a shaky tone, "He's lying," shouted she, turning to the judge. "His business is doing just fine. There is simply no such thing." To order, the judge tapped his gavel warningly. At the moment, according to the documents, there is nothing registered in Dave's name. His business activities have ceased. There's no official income. The minimum payment is the most you can get from him. "But what am I supposed to do?" "Are you powerless?" Cindy asked. "I'm still on maternity leave. I don't have the money to support 3 children. Provide the court with evidence of your ex-spouse's income. And then the question of the amount of alimony can be reconsidered." The judge said dryly, "Stop whining. Dave quietly insulted and say thank you that I left you the apartment and do not claim it." The woman laughed. Her voice sounded like the voices of mentally ill people. It seemed to her that everything that was going on was just a devilish representation of her imagination. "But do you know this is my apartment? My parents left it to me. If you'd even dare to claim it." Dave shrugged indifferently. The judge dismissed the case. Divorce finalized, alimony awarded. Cindy was left with nothing. She walked home, despite the fact that it was quite far to walk, contemplating her future life. The icy wind blew in her face, and now and then dry leaves stuck in her hair as they flew past. My feet occasionally fell into deep puddles. Late fall had descended on the streets of the city. A downright cold, rainy one. Cindy, ignoring her industrial scraped feet, walked along the highway. Her life was completely ruined, no prospects, and further existence had lost all meaning. Cars squealed past, occasionally giving the woman a dirty splash. But Cindy paid no attention to it. She was crushed. Stopping, she slowly shifted her gaze to the cars. And then a frightening, terrifying, and at the same time, unusually attractive thought visited her head. One step, and it was all over. With a kind of detached joy, Cindy thought. In a kind of trance, she took this step, and then the second. A passing car screeched to a halt and flew into a deep puddle. And the woman was splashed with icy water from head to toe. The driver rushed on. She looked at him sadly. She took another step. It seemed that she was being pulled by invisible strings like a doll. Cindy thought she had finally found a way out. It was so close. All that was left was to choose the right moments, to throw herself under the wheels so that they would not have time to slow down. Suddenly, Cindy stopped abruptly. In her mind's eye, the faces of her children flashed before her eyes. The girls, they were so small and defenseless, and her son her darling boy. How would they be without her? Cindy shook her head and only then had time to realize how close she was to death. Her back was covered in cold sweat. "Yasha, I just almost did." She didn't finish her thought and rushed to run with all her legs. When she got back to the footpath, she started rubbing her face with her hands. Her hands, clothes, and hair were all covered in mud. She looked at herself and marveled. What state had she brought herself to? No, she would live for her children. As time passed, the days passed, but Cindy never got any lighter. Her only incentive to live was her children. She had set a clear goal to raise them, to provide for them, and to keep them safe. Cindy was determined that she would raise the little ones, give them everything they needed. And then, when they were no longer in need of her, she could do the deed. And she, gritting her teeth, continued to manage the household, to take care of the kids, to work. But on her own life, Cindy put a fat cross. Lucy moved into Cindy's apartment. The space allowed. The girl's parents left her a large 4-room apartment as an inheritance. Lucy's 1-room apartment they rented out, which allowed to have at least some additional income. Pension, grandmothers, money from rent, and the crumbs that Cindy could earn on the internet. That was it. What did they have? Just the bare essentials. Not to the point of luxury, although luxurious. Cindy had never been before. Stingy Dave allocated to the family exactly as much as was necessary. There was never any talk of expensive things and foreign trips. Even on the most ordinary family vacations. They had traveled together God knows how many years ago. The son had been a toddler then. Now Cindy suspected. No, she was just sure that the bastard spent all his money on other women. One bitterly cold October afternoon, Cindy decided to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. She left her grandmother with the children and went to one of the coffee shops where her ex-husband's office was located. On the way, Cindy kept replaying in her head the events that had taken place in court. She could not believe that Dave's business had really failed. It seemed impossible to her. Before they'd broken up, he'd been doing just fine. Cindy headed toward the coffee shop with the sole purpose of catching her ex-husband red-handed. Take pictures of a thriving business and bring the evidence to court. Maybe they got mixed up, or had Dave managed to cover his tracks so cleverly? Either way, she needed proof that the father's business was thriving, and he was obliged to pay his offspring decent child support. Cindy walked up to the coffee shop and froze in place. Sure, the place was in full swing. A crowd of customers piled around, holding paper cups of coffee. Through the large windows, it was obvious that the staff was signing in. So many people were there. Cindy exhaled heavily. So this is how she felt the rage start to fill her body, and pulled out her cell phone to start recording video evidence. Cindy started filming. She captured the front of the coffee shop, videotaping everyone leaving from the customers coming inside, so that Dave would have no chance to say that the business was not generating proper revenue. She caustically commented on the footage and finally went inside to elbow the customers, advancing forward and remembering to videotape everything that was happening. Tricky. She took advantage of the fact that she knew the hidden passages from the eyes of visitors and went inside the back room with the purpose to take Dave by surprise and show future viewers that the coffee shop really belongs to him, and he has a very, very good income. Cindy went inside, walked up to the supervisor's office. It was obvious that there was a light on inside. That meant that Dave was at his workplace. Cindy rejoiced to herself, opened the door abruptly, and the cell phone fell out of her hands, screen down, shattering in the process. Kathy reprimanded Cindy in a fallen voice. "What are you doing here?" irritatedly asked her friend. The young mother hurriedly pulled on her clothes. She was sitting upright in Dave's arms. Both were half undressed. "Kathy, it's true." Yuan Cindy couldn't believe what was happening. Her best friend and her ex-husband. How is that possible? "No, man," Julius Keezer ironically replied Kathy. "What are you doing here? Can't you see? We're busy." Cindy didn't know what to say. She knew Dave had another woman, of course, but to have her Kathy like this, she couldn't believe her eyes. How long had this been going on? Asked a helpful Reddy, coming to her throat. "Calm. How could you? How could you?" "Not the first year," replied Kathy, finally putting on her clothes. "And you're an idiot, dear, if you haven't noticed. I love Dave and he loves me. You've always been redundant. I'm an extra." Cindy was taken aback. "Is that why you kept telling me to dump Dave? You really had your eye on him. God, and I thought you were my friend. How dare you?" Anna asked, "And that's how you didn't appreciate your man. Now you're just sitting there with your nose in the air." She got close to Cindy, but she was giving birth to a horde. "Do you think he needs it?" She laughed caustically. "You're just a walking incubator. So that's who your secret macho man is?" And here I thought Cindy was thinking out loud. Things seemed to be starting to make sense. Kathy's nervous behavior and her mysterious lover. Yes, that's him. Kathy replied with pride in her voice and moved closer to Dave again to leave a demonstrative kiss on his lips. Cindy didn't know what to say. She shifted her gaze from the silently superior Dave to her friend, who was so angry and, as it turned out, completely unknown to her. Finally, she came out of her daze, proudly squared her shoulders. "All right," she laughed playfully. "Well, good luck to you. Lovebirds. It's just a pity, of course, that now you'll have to pay alimony." She looked at her ex-husband. "Yeah. Dave, I have proof. I videotaped the whole thing and I'm taking it to court. It shows your business is booming. And you, Milo, is with some girl. Sitting in the director's chair, ready to pour your purse strings." Smiling victoriously, she squatted down to take the phone in her hands and froze. The device's screen was shattered, and the phone itself had stopped working altogether. Kathy, nastily, laughed, which broke her proof. "What a moron you are," she, laughing, through her head. "And you don't have any proof. There never was and there never will be. Dave signed the firm over to me a long time ago. So he really doesn't have any business. You're out of the money." "Asshole." She took a wide step towards Cindy and was insulted. "Now get out of here." And Cindy had no choice but to leave the place with a broken phone in her hand. A couple of weeks later, late fall took over, the time when winter had not yet arrived, and the bright colors had already faded. It was windy, slushy gray. Such weather was entirely in keeping with Cindy's inner state of mind. After that day, when she found out that she was betrayed not only by her husband, but also by her best friend, the girl went into an even more terrible depressive state. More and more often she was visited by suicidal thoughts. And the fact that the money from her ex-husband, and really do not get, finished her finally. Cindy spent a lot of time searching for information on the internet. And it is true, if the company was rewritten to another person, and he is less registered as unemployed, no money to be seen. She didn't even try to recover her old cell phone. And the point of that video won't help her anyway. Social networking games. All this girl was no longer interested. She bought herself a push-button phone just to stay in touch with her grandmother and her bosses. Cindy's personal life was forgotten, cut off forever. Like trimming excess greenery from a bonsai tree. On such a cold, straight day, Cindy ran out to the store. The baby was already in the water or feeding, and the jars of baby puree had run out. A freezing wind blew frost and rain in her face, but it wet the woman's curly hair, making it flood even more. Cindy quickened her step. She didn't feel like being outside at all. Her fingertips were starting to feel cold, thankfully. The nearest store was within walking distance of Cindy's house. She was already leaving the supermarket with her bags full of groceries. The store door slammed shut, and Cindy stopped abruptly. Oh man, collapsed, sagging woman. In the time she'd spent in the frost store, the rain had turned into a veritable downpour. The wind harshly conquered now and then, lifting piles of leaves and empty bags into the air. The streets were instantly deserted. The woman took a deep breath and plotted a trajectory to avoid hitting a puddle. Ran with all her might toward the house. She figured if she switched to running, she'd get us a slightly smaller puddle than usual. But then as soon as Cindy, having gained speed, stepped over the first step from the store's porch, she flew down the small staircase. Though her fall was quite insignificant, it seemed to her that her whole life had flown before her eyes. She eased to her knees, managing to put her palms forward. The skin on her arms pulled apart, her back grimaced in pain. And the groceries she had bought rolled forward. Before Cindy realized exactly what had happened, a pitiful whimpering sound was heard from behind her. She turned around before she could get to her feet. Right on the steps lay the cause of her fall, a medium-sized dog. A dark brown colored dog with short hair. Cindy was angry at first. "Why are you getting underfoot?" she shouted. Then she got up, gathered up the groceries in a flash, and once more looked at the dog. The dog shrank from fear, but did not leave the very step on which he lay, most likely a poor animal. Decided to hide from the downpour under the store's canopy and lay down right at the entrance, before realizing that such a place could be quite crowded. Cindy took another look around the dog, all wet, shabby, emaciated. He would have liked to run away, especially after being kicked unintentionally. But the poor thing didn't have the strength for that. Cindy was soaked to the skin, muttering angrily. She was already heading towards the house, but something stopped her. Her heart pricked, and the image of the poor dog came back before her eyes. She came back slowly and reached out her hand, letting the dog sniff it. "Well, whose are you?" she asked, knowing full well that the dog wouldn't answer her. Big eyes, the dog's reflected fear. He tried to stand up to get away from the potential danger, but he could not get up on his paws. He panted pitifully again, pressing his large ears against his head. Cindy Schick came closer to the dog, called out to him. The dog declared with its tail, but failed to rise to its feet. The animal probably had something broken. Then Cindy, scolding herself for being too soft-hearted, rushed toward the house. She quickly jumped up Granny's grocery bag and rummaged for something in the large hall closet. Lucy wondered sneakily, "What's the matter? Where are you in such a hurry?" she asked her granddaughter. "Now, Ba," shouted Cindy from the depths of the pantry. "I found it." She rejoiced and went out into the hallway, holding an old baby blanket in her hands. "Cindy." Grandmother splashed her hands. "Will you explain to me what's going on?" Granddaughter, grabbing the car keys from the shelf, quickly retold Lucy the story of meeting a homeless vagrant. The old lady's eyes rounded. "And what are you going to do with this dog? Are you going to bring Cindy home? What if she's sick? Do you have little children?" "I understand," Cindy snapped at her. "I'm taking her to the vet, Grandma." "Well, you should have seen those miserable eyes. The dog's dying. I can't not help, or you're just gonna leave her like that." She looked Grandma in the eye with defiance. "Oh, no, of course not." Lucy was embarrassed. "You're a good, kind soul. Run and save the doggy." When the door behind Cindy slammed shut, the old woman wiped away an incoming tear. "How like her mother," quietly said the old woman. Cindy, taking the car, drove back to the store. She had been gone for literally 15 minutes, and the dog hadn't gone anywhere. It didn't even roll over. The woman noted painfully to herself. She was finally convinced that something was broken in the animal, and her heart clenched again with longing. Cindy, holding the plate in her hands, approached the dog. It wagged its tail weakly. Probably the animal has already managed to realize that this man does not wish her anything bad, but on the contrary, wants to help. Wrapped the dog in a blanket, Cindy, though with difficulty, but lifted the dog in his arms. She carried the animal to her car and loaded into the back seats. The dog silently endured as she was carried in her arms and only moaned weakly. And when it was finally loaded into the car, in the eyes of the animal read such gratitude, such love. Cindy slammed the door, started the car engine, and the car started. They drove to the veterinary clinic. "How many are dazed?" asked Cindy, slamming her big blue eyes. "It's a dog, not an elephant. Why is it so expensive?" The vet fixed the edges of his shirt. "What did you want a woman to keep a pet? It's not cheap these days. Moreover, what condition did you bring the poor thing in? He's got fleas and one eye that can't see. His hind legs are broken. He's got a stomach full of garbage, and now he's suffering from bad blood tests." He took Cindy under his elbow, leading the girl a little farther away from prying ears. "It's not your dog." That's right, Cindy answered quietly. "I found her outside the store, couldn't pass her by." The man rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "My advice to you, give up the idea. That dog is not a live one, believe me. You'll only waste your money on him." Cindy took a sharp step back. "What are you saying? Are you suggesting we leave the poor animal to die? Well, you can pay if you want. But yes, put the dog back on the street. He'll find his peace there." The girl couldn't believe it. To her ears, she raised her voice, attracting the other visitors of the clinic. "What kind of doctor are you? I'm gonna cure this poor animal. Whatever it costs me." Cindy abruptly turned around, heading for the receptionist's desk. "I will find the money to cure this poor thing," confidently said the girl, addressing the veterinary clinic employee. "I need another doctor and a doctor. Found a dog, made an operation, put a cast on, and began a long and costly treatment." All the money that Cindy had managed to put aside with Lucy's rent and her salary was spent on the dog's treatment. The male animal was no more than a year old. The family spent a long time choosing a name for the new family member. In the end, the rescue was named Tangerine in honor of the very supermarket at which he was found. As time went on, Tangerine became more and more like a dog at home. His dark brown fur became thicker. In his eyes shone true happiness. The children were very fond of their new friend. And even the strict Lucy, though she was stubborn for a long time, opened her heart to the naughty dog. Once Cindy led him home from a walk. In the entryway, let off the leash, Mandarin wagged his tail, rushed forward, and with interest began to provide the door neighbors. While Cindy called the elevator, the dog studied the space around him. The elevator doors opened. Cindy called out to me, and the obedient dog was instantly to the left of his mistress and entered the elevator with her. When they arrived at their floor, Cindy almost crashed into Maria, the neighbor. The elderly woman, waiting for her elevator, with indignation, Cindy stretched out. "Why is that mutt without a muzzle?" And I almost had a heart attack. At the same time, Mandarin hugged the old lady with interest. He went around her from different sides, and without detecting a potential danger, poked his wet nose into the palm of the old woman's hand. The woman wailed, Cindy, put that monster away. "He's going to bite me now." She spun around in one place, shrieking nastily. At the same time, the dog took a couple of steps back, drove him and the neighbors. I tilt my head to the side, and there are 3 big ears on you. "Good afternoon, Maria." Cindy said, "Hello, I'm sorry. I forgot, I let him off the leash. I didn't expect to see you." "What a number." The woman was outraged. "I'm already banned from my own home." She shifted her gaze to the dog, who was already sitting at the foot of the mistress, and studied Maria with interest. She hissed, "Get out of here. Get out of here. He's not touching you," Cindy said, stroking Tangerine's head. "He just wanted to say hello, but he's not mean. He's sociable, friendly. Don't be afraid of our Tangerine." The old lady, having already missed her elevator, laughed Tangerine, a name to match this mongrel. The dog, hearing his name, again approached the neighbor, wagging his tail. The old lady exploded with indignation. You, who's talking?" She twisted in place again, twitching her arms, then swung her big red bag to hit the dog on the head. "Don't," shouted Cindy, taking a step forward. "Don't you yell like that. He won't even look in your direction. Did you call his name?" "Of course he did. He wanted you to devour him." When he saw all the commotion at the Mandarin, he shouted modestly. I guess he wasn't sure what was going on that was inappropriate. What if the angry neighbor was about to lash out at the landlady? He barked again just in case. And Maria ran out towards the stairwell. Take him away, he wants to bite me." "She won't," Cindy shouted back, losing her patience. "Stop this nonsense." "What?" the indignant old woman shouted. Her cheeks were shaking. Her face was pouring paint. I'll have you. "Cindy, you're out of your mind." She ain't got a dime to her name. She's a mongrel in the house dragging, treating their surgeries make salve. She spat in the direction. The girl took a couple steps closer. "Right husband left you." "Crazy," she shouted. Mandarin still did not understand what was happening. Standing up in front of the mistress, Cindy decided not to answer anything. She went to her door, pulling out her key, and quickly entered the apartment. Cindy decided there was no point in arguing with the old lady. Mandarin obediently sat next to her while Cindy elaborated. Then she walked to the bathroom, beckoning the dog to follow her. "Tangerine to wash his paws," she said. And the clever dog skillfully jumped over the edge of the tub and stood waiting to be washed. Lucy peeked into the bathroom. "How was your walk?" she asked. "The girls are asleep. The reindeer are still visiting a friend." "Good, thank you," Babel shouted the girl without turning around and my paw to the animal. "Now I do business and go pick up Alex." Okay. What was all that yelling in the entryway? It's Masha again. "Cindy, turn off the water," nodded. She took a dog towel and started wiping the dog's feet. She was yelping again, threatening to poison the tangerines. No, can you imagine poisoning some crazy woman? He's not evil at all. That's terrible, commented Lucy. Yeah, Maria's the kind of person who'd love a reason to get into a fight. And you, Cindy, be careful. You never know. She's really grass on the grass. Cindy felt sick to her stomach. She told the dog to get out of the bathtub and went into the kitchen to feed the dog, and she thought about it. She had a dog once before, a long time ago. In her early childhood, her parents had given their pushy daughter a Dachshund puppy. After all, the girl kept talking about the dog without ceasing, dreaming of how one day she would become a good mistress and faithful dog. Cindy was happy when her dream came true. She named the dog Villa and spent a lot of time with her new friend. Even sometimes forgetting about her friends, the dog brought no problems, and Cindy could never understand why her parents didn't want to get one for so long. Finally, after almost 30 years, Cindy found the reason. As soon as Tangerine appeared in their family, Cindy was surprised to find how many people in the world who do not like dogs to walk their faithful friend. She kept catching slanted glances from strangers. A lot of people were panicking over nothing. Just seeing a large dog in front of her, neighbors were murmuring acquaintances, twisted their fingers at the temple, wondering how it was possible to spend so much money on an animal. Someone, like that neighbor, threatened to poison the innocent dog. Someone occasionally swung his fists. When an innocent dog wanted to simply sniff a stranger, yes, many people were afraid, judged, murmured. But all these unfortunate introductions to the world Berkeley in the background of the rest of the half of humanity, which is called the dog people. Many smiled at the cute dog, asking permission to pet him. Children passing by waved at the furry dog, reaching out their little hands to the good-natured dog. Cindy has gotten to know many of the dog people who live in her home. They walked their dogs together. Now and then they chatted about nothing and everything in the world. Of course, with Tangerine was a lot of problems at least, because for his treatment, Cindy had to lay out a tidy sum. But Cindy never once regretted taking him in. He was so sweet, so good-natured, always cheerful. He gave the abandoned woman as much love as she needed. He always greeted Cindy with joy. He guarded her. He loved her with the kind of devoted love that only a loyal and kind dog can love as human. Cindy poured food into the bowl, set the well-mannered Mandarin on the floor, sat down. Across from her, tail wagging a bagel. He waited for the command powerfully. Cindy smiled, looking at her pet commanded, and Tangerine proceeded to eat. She was reminded of Lola again. Unfortunately, she had died tragically. Cindy was 8 years old at the time. She was walking her Dachshund not far from the road and got distracted discussing something with one of her Lola friends. After picking up a yard dog, she ran out into the road. The driver did not notice in the darkness low doggy and hit her to death. Poor girl, alas, cried a sea of tears. She was tormented by resentment at the whole world, rejection of grief, guilt. After all, as it seemed to her then, it was her fault for what happened. After the death of Lola, Cindy vowed never to have pets again. Losing them was so painful, so unbearable. Moore never wanted to experience it again. But when she grew up and was already married, she wanted to have a four-legged pet again, but Dave was adamantly against it. "No dogs in my house," he yelled, a source of contagion. "Ew, gross, drool." So Cindy abandoned the idea of getting a pet again. Before she knew it, after her divorce, she was now free to make her own decisions and choices. The arrival of a Tangerine in her life was something unexpectedly new. Tangerine was a true gift of fate. The happy dog finished his food and sat at the feet of his mistress. She looked at him thoughtfully and smiled warmly. "How lucky I am to have you." And the dog came, already smiling and wagging his tail contentedly. It had been almost a year since Cindy had had Tangerine in the house. It was August. The streets of the city were bought by the soft velvet weather. The summer rays had already lost their hot power, becoming weaker and therefore more pleasant. Cindy and the Tangerines went out for their morning walk. The clock showed 7 o'clock. The cool and fresh air was invigorating. The sun was just beginning to warm the earth. The woman let the dog off the leash, stepped out onto the path, took a deep breath. The fresh air was invigorating. The smells mingled with each other. The earth smelled of dry leaves, tempted grass. The scent of approaching fall was in the air. Tangerines, upon hearing the command, the walker happily rushed off to explore the new smells. He ran along the trees. From time to time, he began to dig something with interest, but quickly stopped this business when the stern mistress at the cry of the ox cannot. Cindy watched her pet with pleasure. Looking at the dog, she herself learned to appreciate what she already had. After all, the dog, walking in the same place every day, still studied the surroundings with genuine interest, as if for the first time. Of course, because so much had changed overnight. So many new smells had appeared. So many events had happened in a few hours. That was how Cindy, looking at her friend, learned to appreciate her life. She came to terms with the fact that her husband had left her. Why did she have to suffer so much? Cindy thought to herself, thank God it happened now and not another 10 years later. He didn't deserve all of us. She summed it up. Thinking back on her lingering depression now, she was horrified at how she could even think of ending her life. After all, she had such wonderful children growing up. Watching them grow up was a real joy. After a while, Cindy realized that everything that happened to her is not the biggest misfortune in life. Betraying her husband and her friend had made her stronger. It taught her to understand people, taught her to value her personal space. After all, if she hadn't left her, Dave Cindy wouldn't have saved Tangerine's life. And is there anything more valuable in this world than someone else's life? Tangerine, having finished his business, returned to the feet of Mistress Cindy, clung to his collar at the leash, and headed toward the dog park. As she got closer, she noticed she was already being waved at. Betty's new friend. There was already a whole bunch of people at the playground that Cindy had befriended. Good morning. You're late today, Betty said. She was a tall, big girl with a short haircut. They had met a few months ago, walking their dogs in the yard. Nastya had an adult, a bull terrier, and a daughter the same age as Alex. The kids were now socializing a lot too, walking their dogs together. Hi. Cindy came into the playground, closed the gate behind her, and let Tangerine off the leash again. The happy dog was in the company of several friends in no time. Cindy, we were just waiting for you. The man standing a little farther away from the others said thoughtfully. It was Herbert, another of Cindy's new friends. He had an older, small mongrel dog. Herbert was introduced to Cindy by Betty. We have a great offer for you. Before the cold weather hits. Oh yeah? Interested? Cindy asked, looking at the way Tangerine was fighting with the other dogs. What kind of volunteering? She clarified. All summer long, she and her new group of friends had been busy volunteering. They occasionally brought food and medicine to dog shelters, cleaned up parks, and fed homeless dogs. Such activities cheered Cindy up. She hadn't realized before how wonderful selfless help could be. Herbert nodded his head in agreement. Our park needs volunteers for the fall. We'll need to clean up and update the markings on the jogging paths. We can bring the kids. While we clean up, the kids can play on the playground. All in all, it will be fun and rewarding. Betty got involved in the conversation, taking a step forward. We'll all be there. We were just waiting for you. What do you say? I'm all for it. Cindy replied happily. When we get started. And here they are already tidying up their favorite park. All in all, about 20 people gathered. Most of them came with their children and dogs. A girl named Miranda, who works as a kindergarten teacher, stayed with a group of small children to play with them on the playground. The rest of the adults started cleaning up. Cindy, how are you? Asked Betty. She uncurled her back, warming up, stretching her arms wide and doing pull-ups. I'm getting tired, Cindy replied with a smile on her face. Repeating after her friend, she put aside the trash bags and did a couple of warm-up and back exercises. I'm still full of energy. You want to get some rest? I'll go off on my own here. The volunteers split into pairs and began cleaning up different parts of the park. Betty and Cindy assigned one area closer to the main entrance. No need for that, Betty replied. Back to picking up trash. How are you? Well, how's your morale in general? She smiled modestly, fixing the short strands of her hair. You've been getting prettier and prettier lately. Are you feeling better? Cindy frowned. I'm fine, thank you. Why do you ask? Well, when I met you, you were such a wreck. Betty replied, having had a look beforehand. Not yourself. I didn't tell you this, but I knew right away you needed help. You seem to be getting better. That's why I'm asking if you don't want to answer. I'll understand. Cindy was embarrassed. She looked around, a little changed, but determined to tell her new friend about everything that had happened to her in the last year. Cindy dared to open up to someone for the first time in many months to confide in another person. She almost cried again when she told her husband and her friend how meanly she had been betrayed by her husband and friend. Betty was shocked by what she heard and listened to Cindy to the end without interrupting. What a horrible thing to do. A real pig, the girl commented. Cindy nodded. Yes, that's right. They had done a terrible thing, but that was all in the past. After her own story, Cindy felt like she was back in that very same old state of hopelessness, lost in loneliness. A lump rose treacherously in her throat, and Cindy decided to be a little alone. Betty, I'll step back. You don't mind? I want to be alone for a while. Alone, of course. Sure, go ahead. Take your time. Betty, smiling, snatched the trash bag from her friend's hands. Cindy smiled gratefully. She walked at a slow, leisurely pace, deep in thought. One question suddenly dawned on her. Was I able to let go of this pain? She used to think that the past didn't bother her at all. It seemed to her that all resentments were long forgotten, and she was ready to go forward without a backward glance. But when she was telling Betty about it, the resentment flared up with renewed vigor, flaring up as a fire does when someone pours chamomile into it. She walked on, forgetting everything in the world, and her eyes shot up with tears. Cindy was already out of the park when suddenly Cindy's familiar voice was heard nearby. Kathy, holding Dave under her arm, stopped next to the girl. Noticing her old friend, she seemed to cling to the man even harder, calling his name with her hands. What are you doing here? You look shabby. She giggled and looked at Dave carefully, as if waiting for approval. He didn't change his face. Hi, how are the kids? The man asked. Cindy was shocked. She wiped away her tears with a quick wave of her hand. She took a quick look around herself. She was wearing old clothes she didn't need anymore. This was how all the volunteers dressed when they went out on new assignments. After all, it was supposed to be physical labor, and everyone wore those things that were not sorry to get dirty or torn. Cindy smiled at them through the pain. Hi, the kids are doing great. Really, it would be better if their father paid them decent child support. She took a couple steps forward and looked her ex-husband confidently in the eye. He averted his gaze, embarrassed. Kathy's voice resumed. She's not happy. He's actually paying child support. And you're a mother too. Go work on your own. She ran another appraising glance at Cindy and continued. Although I see you're already working, you got a job as a janitor. Yes. She laughed that you can't do anything else. I'm a volunteer. Cindy answered in a calm tone. You could use some work too. You're not doing the world any good. What kind of child support does he pay? $100 for 3 kids. You laugh, but they do, don't they? Kathy argued. What kind of volunteer work? Is that free or something? Oh, come on. That's about what I expected you to say, though. Cindy smiled demurely in response. She looked at the newly married couple carefully. As much as Kathy wanted to show that they were doing well, something was definitely wrong. But what was it that Cindy couldn't figure out? But something about the look in her eyes at that laugh was so insincere. It seemed like this couple had fallen on hard times. Cindy hummed and turned around on the streams, walked back to the park. This encounter seemed to have given her a renewed vigor. How are you? Asked Betty, noticing Cindy approaching, ready to get back to work. Cindy picked up the garbage bag again. Ready, she smiled cheerfully. Thanks for asking me about the past, and thanks for listening. I think it's gotten better. Betty smiled good-naturedly good. By the way, how would you like to go to an amusement park with the kids this weekend? That's a great idea. Cindy smiled back at her friend. The work that day went as well and fruitfully as ever. As time passed, the years passed one after another, and Cindy's life became brighter, more interesting, and fuller. Cindy's friendship with her new acquaintances became stronger and stronger. Now they did not just walk their dogs, but attended various events. Went all together to the movies, bowling, arranged parties for children. The children of the new friends, in turn, also became friends. Already 14-year-old Alex spent more and more time with his friend Lena, daughter of Nastya. The parents often joked that when their children grew older, they would start dating. Cindy finally realized where her calling lay. After consulting with friends and finding a good course, Cindy went to study to become a sinologist. Life began to shine with new colors and became as good as never before. One winter evening, Cindy was playing with tangerines with her children. "Mom, look," Alex stretched forward his hand. "You saw, you saw, you saw." They laughed merrily as they watched the tangerines. There was a clever dog and perfectly understood with whom and in what game it is most profitable to play. He ran up to Alex, holding his toy wheel in his teeth, and offered the boy to play tug of war. When approaching little girls, however, Mandarin immediately turned into an affectionate and lazy dog, laying on the floor and letting the children pet him as much as they wanted. Cindy was sitting on the couch, next to her grandmother, and Alex panted and ran up to her mother, "Mom, and take a video of him. Then we'll put it on the internet, he's so funny." Alex said quickly and ran away from the adults, grabbing the ring again. Cindy fidgeted. She reached into her pocket, looking for her cell phone. But judging by the shrieks, laziness, she didn't have time to capture anything interesting, "Mom. But take a picture. Are you missing so much?" screamed the boy. Cindy was now answering, having never found her smartphone nearby. "Alex, I can't. I don't know where the phone went." "Shit, Mom," replied the boy resentfully. "Well, why can't you take it off? Write it down on your piece of paper then." Cindy thought for a moment. She really had a habit of writing down on small sheets some of her thoughts. And tangerines about girls, about everything in the world. Why did she need to do that? She didn't know herself. That night, after putting the kids to bed, she turned on her old, dusty computer, opened her notes, tapped rapidly on the keyboard. An hour later, Cindy was already rereading the text she had written. In it, she described the Mandarin's entire game, and how amusingly he took his toy away from the laziness, and how cute he was lying around, giving in to the little girls. It ended up being a pretty well-written, humorous story. Cindy reread her work several times with great pleasure, realizing that she seemed to have found a new hobby. Though the girl was not going to post her text anywhere, the very process of writing gave her a lot of joy. Writing about her favorite everything was so interesting and so pleasant that Cindy smiled with all her mouth. And Alenka said without thinking, pondering, "She keeps a document of the story." From that very evening, Cindy began to make little notes about her beloved Mandarin from time to time. "So men, get the bags out," Betty commanded in a businesslike tone. A group of dog owners had gathered once again to help one of the local shelters. The volunteers donated food for homeless dogs, brought some toys and medicine. They set themselves a goal to give away as many stray dogs as possible into good hands, and seriously engaged in this project, putting a lot of their energy into it. Cindy stepped forward, starting a roll call of the gathered volunteers. One by one, people responded, until a single, surprisingly unfamiliar name to Cindy remained on the list. She looked up what purpose that person was supposed to be here for, repeated the name Nick. "Nick the photographer is here." Those standing nearby began to involuntarily look around. The photographer was nowhere to be seen. Okay, apparently the photographer wasn't coming today. Betty took a deep breath. It was a shame. He would have been much needed today. He's a very famous man. I'm surprised you haven't heard of him. Takes pictures of stray animals and puts them on social media. Maybe something's wrong. I'll give him a call. But before Betty could get her cell phone out, the door of the shelter opened and a man burst inside. Sorry, I'm late," he muttered, laughing. A disgruntled Cindy turned around and froze in place. In front of her was a very handsome man. About 40 years old, tall, smiling, self-confident, he smiled broadly around his mouth with many small wrinkles, giving his smile a special charm. Bright, light gray eyes were burning with enthusiasm. His broad shoulders were confidently set. Cindy was embarrassed to realize she had caught the attention of this handsome stranger. finished saying hello to his acquaintances. He took a step in her direction. "Hi, I'm Nick. Today I'm going to take your pictures of 6 kefi's, and in a couple days I'll post them with descriptions." I don't want to brag, but he laughed softly, shooting a hand through his short blonde hair. "The dogs will be snapped up in no time. I have extensive social media contacts. Do you?" He held out his hand to her. "What's your name?" "Cindy," the woman replied. Finally embarrassed, "It was nice to meet you. I thought you weren't coming." "You're insulting me." He smiled again. Cindy stared at his lips as if mesmerized, unable to take her eyes off them. "I'd always keep my word." Nick seemed to be embarrassed now, "But can you help me?" "I need advice on getting the lighting right." "Sure," Cindy answered quickly. He nodded his head gratefully, putting his hand out in front and allowing Cindy to go first. That's when Nastya's silly laugh erupted. He doesn't know how to pick up the lighting. Of course, she giggled, patting Nick on the shoulder. And the kids are the master." Betty winked at Cindy and quickly ran off somewhere. Cindy, on the other hand, poured on the paint and walked forward before Nick could notice the embarrassment on her face. The two of them managed to get some great pictures of stray dogs. True, Cindy didn't quite realize how she had been involved in making those pictures. After all, Nick was the only one who did everything, but he confidently convinced the others that the good pictures were solely due to Cindy. That same evening, the photographer invited her to dinner. So they got to know each other better, and Cindy happily realized that the man liked her as much as she liked him. Nick turned out to be not only a popular photographer, but also an avid dog person. He had 2 Spitzes that he treated like his own children. Cindy carefully made inquiries about his past. He had never been married, and no children appeared to be in his possession. When he learned that Cindy was raising 3 children alone, he was absolutely thrilled. There was immediately an immense amount of respect in his eyes. Nick and Cindy exchanged phone numbers. The new friend made Cindy promise that she would introduce him to the children. And so a new couple was formed. These two were very supportive of each other, more and more dissolved in their relationship. After a couple months of their close acquaintance, Cindy invited Nick to her house. Nick helped Cindy put the girls to bed. Alex was absolutely delighted with his mom's new friend. When Lucy's children had already gone to bed, Nick asked Cindy a favor to use the computer. Something needed to be done urgently for work. Cindy unlocked it for now and went to take a shower while her boyfriend was busy working. When she returned, she noticed a sleek smile on the photographer's face. "What are you doing?" "Smiling," asked the girl. "Already finished and allowed myself a little too much." "Sorry," he spread his hands, continuing to smile slyly. "What's the matter?" asked Cindy, removing the towels from his head. "What's so extra?" I was about to turn off the computer when suddenly an interesting file caught my eye. "Sorry, I read the whole thing. You didn't tell me you were such a talented writer." He walked over to the girl, taking her hand. "You have great stories. Where do you publish them?" Cindy embarrassed, squeezing the man's hand with slender fingers. "Nowhere. I write for myself. Who else would want my stories?" "What do you mean, who?" Nick was genuinely surprised at everyone. "You owe it to yourself to publish them. Your notes shouldn't just gather dust. Let's get you a social networking page." "Oh, well," Cindy wondered. "I don't know. Do you think anyone would want that?" "Sure, you're a dog behaviorist. So you can share your knowledge with your followers. And every once in a while, you'll post your stories. It's both useful and entertaining. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. Your writing will be a success," Nick said confidently. He went back to the computer again, quickly bored into the keyboard. "Done. Let's come up with a nickname for you." Cindy laughed, let's. And the lovers started going through various options for Cindy's future. Cindy and Nick's relationship was growing rapidly. 6 months passed since they met, and the couple finally decided to move in together. Nick moved to live in Cindy's apartment, and they began renting out his place. Lucy blessed them and moved back into her apartment. The elderly woman liked her granddaughter's new choice, and she continued to be a frequent visitor to her biological father's newly formed family. The twin girls never had time to remember because they were still very young. When Dave left the family, So the little sisters called Nick Daddy. After a while, Alex started to call his stepfather Dad. They developed a very close and trusting relationship. Money in the family became much more. After all, Nick was earning well. But do not forget about the achievements of Cindy. The mother of 3 children also formed a good income. She also continued to work as a cinematographer and actively maintained her blog, the same one she started with Nick. He took beautiful pictures of Mandarin for her, and Cindy herself published her notes and shared her knowledge of dog training. Nick the Spitz managed to befriend Tangerine. Cindy's life, once abandoned and deserted by her husband, was filled with a happiness she had never dreamed of. It was a warm, spring evening. Nature was just beginning to awaken from its long winter sleep, and the day was getting longer. A warm May breeze was blowing. There were fresh smells coming from everywhere, and all the plants were blooming. Cindy walked with a confident gait, and with her lush curls with large branches blowing in the wind, her bright eyes were burning with true happiness. She was wearing a light, airy blue dress. Cindy was going to a small cafe, because that's where she was organizing a meeting with her subscribers today. A couple of days ago, having announced this action in her social networks, Cindy was surprised to find out that many of her subscribers lived with her in the same city. Admirers of her work from time to time flooded her with questions about whether a reunion with her subscribers was possible. Finally, Cindy was ripe for such an event. And here she was already opening the door of the cafe. She had one big announcement to make today. She was going to be publishing a collection of her short stories about dogs very soon. Cindy couldn't wait to share such great news with her subscribers. As soon as she entered the cafe, she was immediately overwhelmed by a wave of applause. People who came to the meeting rose from their seats, welcoming their favorite blogger. Some were whistling, others had already rushed to hug the famous cinematographer, offering to take a joint photo. Some of them were just shouting something from the audience that was hard to hear. Cindy tried to pay enough attention to everyone, but alas, it did not work out well. The crowd was much larger than the newfound celebrity had expected, and the room was too small to accommodate all the people who came. Subscribers kept coming up and down the line. They asked for advice about the proper upbringing of dogs, about how one can learn to write stories so well and so interestingly. It turned out that some of her subscribers even traveled from other cities to meet Cindy in person. The girl was wrapped up in so much attention that she completely forgot about her big news. When Cindy calmed down the crowd a bit and went to the center of the hall to answer all the questions one by one, the door opened abruptly. She turned her head and saw him, her Nick. The subscribers again exploded with cheers of approval, because it was thanks to his popularity on the internet that Cindy was able to reach her heights. Nick, already used to being recognized on the streets, calmly walked forward, took a few pictures with the subscribers, and stood next to Cindy, raising his hand to say something. Everyone fell silent. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" Nick said loudly, causing even the most active fans to come over, taking it out. "I have an important announcement to make." A ringing silence reigned in the hall. One could only hear the refrigerators in the cafe's kitchen running. Everyone was silent for a moment, listening to Nick. He looked at everyone with a scrutinizing gaze, and then turned toward Cindy. Cindy herself had no idea what was going on. She held her breath, anticipating some important event. "Cindy, I wanted to tell you one important thing today, as I believe she hasn't had time to share her plans with you yet. Perhaps that's for the best." He looked around the room again, intriguingly, shooting his eyes. "But now I have another equally important announcement to make." The photographer abruptly dropped to one knee, in parallel pulling out a box containing an engagement ring from his pocket. When everyone present realized what he was going to do, the hall exploded again with cheers and applause. Nick raised his voice, "Cindy, will you marry me?" Having said this, kneeling down, he opened the box and revealed a ring to Cindy. It was a gold engagement ring with a large and daintily bound sapphire. He took into account the interest of the audience beforehand and showed the subscribers the ring. He then shifted his gaze back to Cindy in expectant anticipation. Of course, she said yes. Cindy pulled her husband-to-be by the hand. He rose from his knees and the couple merged in a kiss. They immediately began to be blinded by the flashes of cell phone cameras, because those present were racing to take pictures and videos of such an important event. When the lovers finally broke away from each other, and the intensity of emotions in the institution has slightly reduced. The couple again received questions from the audience. Someone shouted out, "What else did you want to tell? What's the big news?" Cindy started to look for the person who asked the question, when suddenly she noticed Kathy standing in the farthest corner. Blood came to the girl's face. Her hands shook for some reason. "What's wrong with me?" Cindy thought grudgingly. She had gotten used to having so much attention directed at her lately. But Kathy, she stood with her arms folded under her breasts, her once bright and long hair having lost its former luster. Her face had faded as well. Goosebumps ran down Cindy's back. There was something unkind about Kathy, something strange. Cindy tried to pull herself together. She took a couple of deep breaths and finally answered yes. There was more important news besides our wedding. She was silent for a while, repeating after Nick, trying to keep the pause necessary for intrigue. "Very soon I will release my first book." The subscribers once again murmured happily. Cindy, satisfied with the result, began to tell the audience what the book was about, when it would be released, and how much it would cost. While listing all this, she could not take her eyes off her former friend. All the while, Kathy continued to stand in the corner of the brown Cindy, with an angry and very unpleasant stare. A chill ran down Cindy's back. She realized it was about time to end the meeting. Cindy announced that she and Nick would be leaving the cafe very soon, and she could take a picture with a few fans. The people began to slowly disperse. And then Kathy came up, "Hi, friend." She started suddenly, joyfully. From the evil and unkind smile, there was no trace of it. Kathy had a big smile on her face. "I see you're doing great, and you're doing great, and you deserve respect." Cindy shuddered again. It seemed that such an outcome should have flattered her ex-girlfriend, the same friend who had stolen Cindy's husband, the same friend who had almost driven Cindy to suicide. She's standing across the street, all scholarly and enthralled, and she's happy, successful, almost a celebrity. She has just been proposed to by a beautiful man, one of the most enviable suitors in their town. But why was her heart clenched by some incomprehensible anxiety? Cindy did not understand why she could not gloat. Kathy smelled something wrong, something cold, evil. Cindy answered, "What do you want?" "Where are your manners? Pretending?" Kathy wondered, "Are you being such a buka? Kathy, are you serious now?" asked Cindy with undisguised irony in her voice. "I'm not interested in talking to you," she said, and headed for the exit. Nick was already waiting for her at the door, watching the conversation between the two girls. Suddenly, Kathy grabbed Cindy's arm roughly. "But what's wrong with you? We're friends," she hissed through a fake smile. Kathy tried her best to look good-natured, sweet, but alas, it was not working out well. "What do you want me to apologize for?" she continued. "If it's so fundamental, please, I'll apologize." Cindy was numb with horror. Kathy's movements were too abrupt, compulsively abnormal. Chilled, she began to break free from her former friend's tenacious grasp. Nick rushed over to the scene. "What's going on here?" he asked, gently yanked persistent Kathy away. "Our meeting is already over. Please leave," confidently said the man. "And I won't sign off. I'm an old friend of Cindy's." She tried to smile sweetly, but her smile was more like a grin. "I came to make up with her. We're friends again." She shifted her gaze to Cindy. Did Cindy shake her head? "No, you have never been my friend, and you never will be. I don't need to socialize with you, and neither do you. Get out of here, and go to Dave. Life doesn't look like it's working out much, though." She laughed, trying to put all her resentment into that laugh. "Goodbye, bitch, and don't ever come near me again." Cindy, taking her fiancé under her arm, left the cafe, leaving the separated all alone. Soon Cindy and Nick were married. They arranged a lavish, beautiful celebration, and the wedding of two famous volunteers around the city for a long time went admiring stories, growing into the most unbelievable details. At the same time, Cindy published her first book. As expected, it was a colossal success. The number of her subscribers increased. Her income doubled even more, and Cindy herself became no longer just a dog blogger, but a real and very famous writer. The family continued to do volunteer work, thus promoting the idea of gratuitous help to the masses. And it bore fruit. More and more people began to help shelters, picking up unfortunate animals from the streets. They finally paid attention to the state of the environment. Not only Cindy's life changed, but also the life of the whole town she lived in. On one of the most ordinary and unremarkable days, Cindy went out for a tangerine walk in the early hours of the morning, leaving the children with Lucy. Nick had left even earlier, taking the Spitz with him. The photographer had some important project to do. Cindy went out to the park, and it looked like it. It was late fall again. Like many years ago, the wind had conquered like a lone wolf, and the dull leaves danced their last dance. Involuntarily, Cindy was reminded of the very day when she had first met the Mandarin. So miserable, exhausted, much abandoned by all, she lowered her gaze to her favorite dog. She couldn't tell now that this dog had once been a street dog. Dense, thick fur, it seemed to glisten. On the wide neck of the dog was a luxurious collar. A thick, lush tail wagged with happiness. She smiled, giving her memories of Tangerine, as if sensing what his mistress was thinking, jabbed his big wet nose into her palm. Cindy and Tangerine walked leisurely along the edge of the nearby forest lanes, setting up for a long walk, but the unexpected sound of a text message made the girl stop. Damn. She took off her gloves, reached deep into her warm jacket for her smartphone's unlock screen. The message was from an unknown number, and the blogger had already managed to roll her eyes, thinking it was another persistent fan, when suddenly she froze in place. The text message that arrived read, Cindy, read this message to the end. Dave is dying. Surgery soon, but there is little hope. Things are not going well for him. Please come to the clinic. He's really waiting for you, Kathy. Cindy was angry when she read the text message. How dare she manipulate such things? She thought. The first thing that came to her mind was Kathy had just made it all up just to set her up somehow. But why was she frowning? And the Mandarin, noticing the change in her mistress's mood, suddenly fell asleep and began to look into her eyes. The girl put the phone away, put on gloves, and with a quick step, headed towards the house. Something's fishy, and I'm going to find out what it is, she thought, coming home to wash and feed the dog. Cindy picked up her phone again. She reread the text message, wondering. At the same moment, a worried Lucy came into the room. Cindy, what are you doing? Asked the older woman. Cindy, without saying a word, shoved her smartphone with an open message into her grandmother's hands. Perplexed, the old woman reached into her pocket for her glasses. When Lucy read the text message, she unconsciously covered her mouth that opened in surprise. Cindy, why are you sitting there? Go away. This is not a joke, the woman said excitedly. Do you think so? Cindy answered suspiciously. I think it's a joke, and a very stupid and even nasty one at that. Dave's always been a horse's health. I don't know. But I don't feel like going. What are you talking about? Lucy continued to be indignant. No one would joke about such things. Go there and find out, Cindy thought for a moment. Verti, and the cell phone in her hands. She went through her own thoughts for a long time, until she remembered her good and kind friend Gina. The one just worked as a doctor in the local hospital, and probably had access to the database of all patients. She quickly dialed his phone number and explained the situation. She gave her ex-husband's name and surname, asking him to find out if everything her ex-girlfriend had written about was true. Kennedy agreed to help Cindy without any problems and asked her to wait a bit. Cindy, nervously biting her lip, began to set up circles around the room. Concerned Lucy decided not to bother her granddaughter's eyes and left the room, heading for the nursery. Finally, a reply came from the Genin. Cindy opened the text message with shaking hands and was stunned that everything Kathy had written was true. Dave was indeed dying. Without a second thought, Cindy quickly packed and left for the hospital. No matter how she felt about her traitorous husband's death, she had never wished him dead. Dave lay in the hospital bed, unable to even turn his head. His appearance frightened the girl. Dark circles under his eyes in the floor, and Cheek's thin, skinny shoulders. It was the first time in her life Cindy had ever seen him in such a haggard state. "Dave, how neat you are," Cindy asked. "You wanted to see me?" And without moving, Dave raised a pained voice. "Cindy, sit down." Cindy complied with the dying man's request and obediently sat on the edge of his bed. He squeezed her hand weakly. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I know it will be hard, but please forgive me. I know what I did was mean to you, to the children. I know how hard this has been for you. I realize that. I'm terribly embarrassed, Kathy." "She is." He fell silent. Cindy dared not interrupt his speech. After a couple of long seconds, Dave finally continued, "I've written a will. I'm leaving all my business to our children. That bitch will get nothing." He must have summoned all his strength to say the above and almost choked in a coughing fit. "All I'm asking you for is forgiveness. Can you forgive me?" Cindy didn't know what to answer him. She herself couldn't understand exactly how she felt. Probably nothing but pity and compassion. "I forgave you a long time ago, Dave," she said. "You can rest easy about that, can't you?" "Thank you." There was a hoarse goodbye. The body was dying and helplessly covered its eyes. Time went by. Days ran one after another. Life went on as usual. The children grew up. Cindy's blog grew, and sales of her books only increased. Dave, like Kathy, was never heard from again. Eventually, the blogger decided that Dave had already died. Cindy was hesitant to tell her children about what had happened to their father. The girls didn't even know he existed and had always thought Nick was their real father. And relatively adult Alex vaguely remembered about him and made up his own opinion as a man of bad and unworthy example. And the real father to him was Nick, too. "Cindy, can you tell me which breed is the best to train? Which one would have the least amount of problems?" The young blonde girl raised her hand to ask her question. "If you're looking for the easy way out, get a toy dog." Cindy replied cheekily, and laughter erupted throughout the room. Raising any breed of dog is time multiplied by labor. Plus a lot of love. You can't do it without love, Cindy smiled. Today, she was holding another meeting with readers. The event had already lasted for several long hours. When it was finally over, Cindy left to put on her outerwear, a back room. As she returned to the exit, she noticed a male figure in the lobby with a bouquet in his hand. The woman wrinkled her nose. How could she be sick of these obsessive admirers? When he saw her, he rushed toward her, and she looked up at him and was stunned. Dave was standing in front of her, alive and unharmed. His once sunken face and cheeks had once again rounded out behind the left-handed man with a healthy blush. His weight had returned to normal. Cindy slammed her eyes shut in surprise. "Dave, is that you?" she asked in amazement. "Who did you expect to see?" He smirked and studied her bouquet of scarlet roses. "Your favorite flowers," he said proudly. Cindy gloomed. "I've never liked roses." You forgot her cough. "I'm certainly glad you're alive. But why did you come?" "Your forgiveness brought me back to life," Dave exclaimed pathetically. "The operation was so successful that my doctor said it was a miracle. Can't you imagine? And then I realized the whole point was that you gave me another chance. I came back to life to be with you again." The man spoke with a huff. He seemed to be reciting a poem rather than speaking from the heart. Cindy laughed in his face. "What are you talking about? I didn't give you a chance. I've been married a long time. My children have a wonderful father, and it's not you at all." And that's when Nick walked into the room. He gave Dave a disapproving look. "Honey, is everything all right?" the photographer asked, taking his wife's hand. "Everything's fine," Cindy replied calmly. "Let's go home." And the couple left the building, leaving Dave all alone. On a quiet summer evening, Cindy sat with her laptop and a glass of wine in the lovely gazebo at Vita's and Wild Grapes. Nick, nestled nearby, was reading something. A couple of days ago, they had gone with their children and grandmother, and of course, their pets to the countryside to Nick's dacha. To have a little vacation in silence, away from the noise of the big city. This idyll was interrupted by a concerned Alex, "Mom, Dad," gently began the eldest son. "Didn't you watch the latest news?" "No, we are resting from the noise of information," answered Nick, smiling. "What's the matter?" Well, the boy stretched out. How can I put it? He softly shoved his tablet into the photographer's hands. It already had the video open on it on compressed to a stop. Cindy too reached for the clipboard to see exactly what her son wanted to show them and was stunned. The still frame showed Kathy, who appeared to be giving an interview. In the bottom corner was a brightly colored caption, shocking details from the life of a celebrity blogger. Cindy didn't know what to think. She pressed the play button, watched the video with each new minute, and her eyes widened and widened. It was really an interview Kathy had given to some reporter. In it, she said things that made the blood rush from the back of her veins. The ex-girlfriend was blatantly lying about Cindy's life. She was making up stories to smear her reputation. Allegedly, Cindy bullies Mandarins by only using it for content. Made up that Cindy despises volunteers and hates animals. That she stole her current husband Nick away from her family with 3 young children, depriving them of their father's support and child support. She seemed to be making it up as she went along. When the video ended and Cindy, dumbfounded, looked around at her loved ones. The first to raise his voice was Alex. "That's Aunt Kathy, isn't it?" Asked the boy. "Why did she say such nasty things about you?" "You didn't do anything bad to her." He changed a little, but dared to say the following: "You never told us about it." "But she's the one who stole it." He stopped talking. Probably didn't want to call his biological father Daddy. "She's the one who stole Dave. I figured it out when I was a kid. He used to bring her over when you weren't home." "Tell him that it's true. I'm an adult." Cindy was stunned. She had no idea that little Alex understood everything. He'd seen his father cheat on his mother. He'd seen his family destroyed. Heart said hurt for her son. "My poor little boy," Cindy thought wistfully. She said to him, "Yes, honey, you got it right, but it's all in the past. Your dad has come to his senses. He apologized to us. All the offenses are forgotten, and you please do not be angry with him." The boy exploded with indignation. "That asshole is not my father." That's him pointing his finger at Nick. "That's my daddy. I don't need another one." He shouted. He grabbed the clipboard and with a quick movement, sprinted toward the house. "I'll go talk to him," said the photographer, rising from his seat. He placed a kiss on his wife's forehead and followed her out. Cindy was left alone, holding the clipboard. Cindy realized that many people would certainly not believe this crazy woman's tales. But then again, not everyone would. She turned off the video, not wanting to look at that rather sleek face again. Cindy realized that a serious conversation with her former friend could not be avoided. A week later, she was sitting in an expensive restaurant, waiting for her interlocutor. She made an order and already started her lunch when suddenly, as if out of nowhere, Kathy appeared in front of her. She grudgingly hummed and roughly plumped into the chair opposite. "What the hell did you want?" God, all the years that had passed and apparently not the most successful for her were making themselves felt. Her former best friend had already lost her former beauty. Her face seemed to have swollen. More accurately, her body had blurred into extra pounds. She grabbed the menu and felt indignant. "But you're completely overpriced. I can't afford this menu. I'll pay for everything." In a calm tone, Cindy said, not taking her eyes off her salad. "But you're ready to start talking." Kathy replied, giggling nastily. She beckoned to the waiter and poked at the most expensive dish at random. "Bring me that one. You and I have nothing to talk about." "Did you say so yourself?" she added snidely, turning to Cindy. "Or that you were afraid? That the whole truth about you would come out?" "What truth?" Cindy asked, carefully wiping her mouth with a napkin. "We both know it's bullshit. Tell me, why do you need this? What's missing in your life?" "I miss everything, the body odor of anger. I'm sick of people like you. You haven't accomplished a damn thing and you're making a big deal out of yourself." "Ooh, I'm the one who hasn't accomplished anything." Cindy's getting angry. "What have you accomplished, darling?" "Stole your best friend's husband, deprived his children of a father and a livelihood." "Well done, bravo. Too bad most people won't appreciate such accomplishments." Cindy adjusted the edges of her clothes. "Now listen here. I don't know why you're acting like this. Nasty bitch. I guess life with Dave wasn't so sweet, but I don't care about that." Stop gossiping about me right now. She leaned on the edge of the table and looked threateningly at Xenia. Or you'll be sorry. Screw you. We're doing fine. Kathy shouted back, jumping up from her seat. Without waiting for my order, I leave. She got up and ran out of the restaurant. Cindy shook her head unhappily. She leisurely finished her meal, then invited the waiter to pay the bill. When the girl had already reached for her wallet to pay for her lunch, Kathy returned to the restaurant premises. You know what? She shouted, ignoring the perplexed looks of the other diners. You're right. Your hubby turned out to be a real creep. He cheated on me all the time. He lied to me. He didn't trust me with anything. He beat me. Kathy kept yelling, completely out of control. And here you are, all successful and glamorous and rich. I hate you, you hear me? I hate you. Cindy was genuinely surprised, but she didn't let it show. Of course, Dave had never been a perfect husband. His cheating didn't surprise the girl one bit, but to hit her. Cindy was at a loss. She put several large bills on the bill. Threw her ex-girlfriend a cold stare. That's not my husband, darling, that's your husband. With those words, Cindy left the restaurant. The door to the apartment opened and Cindy began to fan out in the hallway. She had 3 furry creatures at her feet, Tangerine and Spitz, Bush and Kitty, jumping up and down and happy to have their mistress back. It was a real and furry storm. Nick barely made it through the dog typhoon. He came up to his wife. How did it go? Asked the man. Oh, Cindy turned out as expected. You talked to her. Did Cindy thoughtfully lose her chin? I think not. The photographer raised his eyebrows in surprise. Why? Why are you so calm about it? I know her character will only get worse. We have to do things differently. And I already know how and how surprised asked Nick, lifting Dusha in his arms. I'll write another book, Cindy said proudly. I'm going to write everything that has happened to me in the last few years. I will write about how I met Mandarin, how he changed my fate. I will present all the evidence of how I was betrayed. Once the people closest to me, no one else will ever believe Kathy again. I know how to do the right thing in a confident and calm tone, the writer spoke. Her spouse looked at her with a mixture of pride and respect. He put his arm around her and said, I believe in you. You're doing great. Kathy forcefully slammed the book shut, tossing it aside. The weighty tome flew away and fell onto the old carpet, raising a cloud of dust behind it. She shouted hate in her heart. At her scream, Dave entered the room. What ripped? He asked, not hiding his annoyance. Cindy Book, she had always been talented. Dreamily said the man. I remember she used to compose such lullabies for Alex. So go to her. Kathy was furious. Ah, yes, she sent you. She does not need you. Calm down. And he raised his voice after her. You're right, she doesn't need me anymore. She's married again. I'm just sick of you. He came closer to her, still holding his ex-wife's book. I'm leaving. I don't know when I'll be back. Don't bother me. Where are you going with anger in your voice? Asked Kathy. None of your business. He made his way to the closet, starting to pick out his clothes. By the way, what do you think of Cindy's new book? I haven't had a chance to read what it's about yet. Kathy clutched his head with his hands on the couch like he always does. About that nasty mutt, I don't know who I hate more than her. Or that nasty little song? What did that dog ever do to you? Dave asked irritably and slammed the door. Kathy continued to rage. She embarrassed me. That dog embarrassed me. At that moment, Kathy had a terrible and wild thought and jumped to her feet. She looked out into the hallway. Dave had already taken up his shoes. She waited for him to leave the apartment, and with eyes burning with rage, she rushed into the kitchen. There she reached under the sink and pulled out cockroach poison. Aha looked in the refrigerator and pulled out a raw steak from the package, stuffed it with poison, and chanted, I hate it. I hate it. Suddenly, this activity was interrupted by a cell phone ringing. Hello, Mom, what do you want? Annoyed Kathy shouted into the phone. Now. No, I'm busy right now. Her voice had already turned to a squeal, but her mother seemed to be adamant. She urged Kathy to come right away. Something had broken or exploded in there. Irritated beyond belief, Kathy barked into the phone palm, quickly threw the poisoned meat into the refrigerator, and ran out of the apartment. A couple hours later, Dave returned to the apartment. Not having found at home his beloved relieved, exhaled the last few years. Dave had regretted more than once that he traded his family for Kathy. She turned out to be so stupid, so rude, so different from what Cindy had been after her illness and miraculous recovery. He didn't sleep at night, waning himself at having abandoned her and the children. Shame devoured the man's heart, searching out the remnants of good in the black abyss, where his soul had long ago faded. He realized everything that day when he was on the verge of death. Dave had tried to leave Kathy many times, but each time he had failed. Suddenly he felt sorry for her. But who needs her now? Losing her former beauty, immersed in his own sad thoughts, Dave went to the bedroom and changed his clothes. An hour ago he had tried to meet Alex, to talk to him, to try to apologize. Prepared a gift, but his son had grown up, sent Dave away. "You're not my father," screamed in his face. "Go back to your bitch. Maybe she'll comfort you." Dave pulled out a bottle of whiskey, poured the glass almost to the brim, and drank it in one gulp, trying to get away from the humiliation he'd just experienced. Yes, he's absolutely right. The man thought, disgusted with himself. "She can't even make dinner," he said indignantly. Swung open the refrigerator and pulled out raw steaks, praised in a container. Pouring oil into a skillet, he picked up the first piece he could find and dipped it in the spices. The strange odor emanating from the meat didn't confuse the lunging Dave at all. Within minutes, he was greedily biting large chunks off the freshly cooked meat. Returning, Kathy soon found her spouse on the floor of the scientist's kitchen in an unnatural pose. An ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. There was nothing more they could do. That Kathy had tried to poison him, not him, but the tangerine. Cindy and her family learned from the newspapers at the inquest that the unwilling ruler had told the truth, hoping for leniency and commutation of her sentence. Cindy was no longer interested in the woman's fate. But Nick then saw a glimpse in the news that she was given 8 years in a penal colony for involuntary manslaughter. "Son, we wanted to talk to you about your father." Nick gently began the conversation. He, interrupting the kid's indignation with a gesture, continued, I know what you are going to say, but please just listen to us." "Alex, you're a big boy now," Cindy added. "It's time you learn to forgive. Understand, resentment, anger, all this only destroys your own soul, destroys you from the inside. It is very important to be able to forgive sweet, not only for your unfriends, but above all for yourself. Mom says important things." The son listened to them. Nick supported his wife. "No matter what, I'll always be your father, and you'll always be my son. But Dave once gave you life, forgive him now. Maybe wherever he is right now. Your forgiveness will do him a lot of good." Alex thought deeply, biting his lower lip, "But he's such a jerk, Ma. He's so mean to you, to me, to the girls." "That's right, honey, but he was very remorseful before he died. You remember, don't you? Try to understand him, understand and forgive him." Cindy said, looking into her son's eyes. The boy was silent for a long time, lowering his head. "Okay, I understand everything." Alex looked his mother in the eyes. "What should I do?" "Alex, honey, you're good. Let's go. Let's go to the cemetery. He's your birth father. You'll tell him at the grave. Everything you have to say, you'll see. Will it make you feel better?" Cindy hugged her son tenderly. Another November was drifting away, the dull leaves swirling and stirring with the first snowy kicks of cold. The fish were standing so cold that their faces burned with the icy breath of approaching winter. The town cemetery was deserted and dreary. A white, tall Jeep drove leisurely along the wet, narrow paths, stopping at a fresh grave with a simple wooden cross. The doors opened and 2 people came in. A tall, beautiful woman in a black leather cloak, and with her a young man with a calm, handsome face, very much like his mother, got out of the car. "Hello, Father," said the boy, approaching the cell phone hill. "I came to say that I forgive you. Things happen in life. It's a pity that we did not have time to make up with you. But I understand now. Thanks to Mom, she's always been very nice to everyone, even you." And it worked, you know? He smiled softly. So come on, Dad. May the earth rest in peace, or whatever they say. Anyway, go ahead. He placed a bouquet of white carnations on the freshly dug in new ground and stepped aside. A woman standing to the side came up to him and took his hand. They smiled at each other, got into the car, and drove away. And the wind continued its sad and mournful autumn dance. But through the dense blue and low-hanging clouds, sunlight occasionally broke through, promising the world a new spring and a new hope.
Subscribe and click the bell. Robert cautiously peeked out of his hiding place to check. The wolf was still there. A wolf, or rather a police-sized beast capable of rivaling a cave-dwelling primitive creature. It hadn't gone anywhere and was carefree, rolling around in the freshly fallen snow, playing catch with its own tail and licking its rich coat. She seemed to demonstrate who was the true master of the situation here, and who was an unlucky little man, who by his stupidity, and as if as a punishment from the universe, got into such a story, which if you tell them, they won't believe and will call him a fantasist, an inventor, who just wants to distract normal people with scary stories. Robert sobbing, because it was not to courage, but just very scary. I quietly closed the shutters of the window in the gatehouse and put the deadbolt back in place. He looked at the five, who shrewdly gave the last wood. There was, of course, still some simple furniture. So, theoretically, he wouldn't have to be cold for the next 24 hours. But the food was bad. The old woman, to all appearances, had not been used for the last years. So there was only what happened to be in her pocket, a chocolate nut bar. But even let it, having torn off the bar and its packaging, Robert greedily snatched a piece and started chewing vigorously. To save money, he saw no point in eating because he was about to risk everything by going outside. And there, if the wolf's offspring didn't catch him, he would soon reach human habitation because the village was at most an hour's walk away. If the wolf catches him, then it's foolish to think about anything at all. Then he won't need food anymore. How did I come to live like this? Robert asked aloud to himself, tearing the chocolate trace from his fingers. He didn't know the answer to that question, if only because just a couple of days ago, his life had been very ordinary and even peppery. However, this very peppercorn, which he decided to diversify his unsuccessful marriage of almost 10 years, and was, in fact, what led him to the present unenviable position. And if right now a good wizard appeared to Robert and offered to use a time machine to go back and fix everything, he would have agreed without a doubt. But the reality was that there were no good wizards around, and so the only thing to do was to live with what he had. If I live at all, Robert added aloud to his thoughts. Nervously, he giggled hysterically, because he really had no idea. How on earth would he ever get out of this whole thing now? When Robert had first married Wendy, he had belonged to that category of young people who believed that there was a place for true love, the kind of love that poets write poems about and fairy tales talk about. Robert was only 25 at the time, but the people around him called him unusually serious for his age, a young man who had not the wind in his head, but an organized plan. And that was actually true. Robert imagined his future in the style of finishing university and then living in a mansion. A successful businessman is happy with the woman he loves, and we have at least 4 children. What's there between uni and the life of a successful millionaire? He didn't have a very good idea and hoped that he would figure it out somehow. After all, life is such an amazing thing and always ready to throw up new opportunities and good luck. You just have to look at them and reach out. Yes, that's what he used to be. And now, when Robert looked back at his young self, he was so ashamed of it. Naive, self-righteous outrage. Nothing. Life will sort things out, Robert's grandmother often said. And as it soon turned out, life, or if you prefer, Mrs. Fate, either a higher power or a simple coincidence. But something Robert soon clicked on his nose and showed him his place, and not a prosperous man and future millionaire. And when that fall, or if you will, the slouching began. It seems, as Robert thought later, when relatives from all sides began to say enough, they said, "Stop putting money in other people's pockets for rent. Better take out a mortgage. You'll manage just fine." So he and Wendy decided to take out a mortgage. And when she was not yet a wife, but a bride, she did something for which Robert respected her for years. She gave up a wedding trip to a tropical island in order to save up for a down payment. Admittedly, after a few years, the topic was lost with the tropical vacation. Wendy often berated her husband. "Yeah, I do everything for you." She said it in almost every argument they had. "You're the reason I'd never seen the sea in my life. What's the problem?" For the next years was to go. Sometimes Robert tried to object. "You could even go alone, by the way, but maybe it would be cheaper that way." And when he said that, his smart and generally calm ones, Wendy would start sniffling like an indignant and simultaneously frightened gopher. And then she'd offer one of 3 counterarguments. First, it's unseemly for spouses to vacation apart. 2, they need to save money. And it's stupid. Cut back on spending all year, then splurge. Thirdly, she wanted to go to the seaside properly. They are in a mood that snatches from fate long desired, which constantly eludes her. And then sometimes, just sometimes, in lieu of such counterarguments, Wendy would start crying ugly tears with a wet, slippery nose, a shuddering of the shoulders, and a rise in tone to a level that was perhaps glass-breaking and weeping. This was how she was received at moments when Robert, out of ordinary sympathy and desire for reconciliation, tried to come over and hug her. "Don't touch me," Wendy might have exclaimed then. And he didn't. And when not only in such, but in many other quarrels, she said that she did not want to see him. Robert, accordingly, could shut up or leave the house, no matter what the weather or the time of day. But in general, if there was an outside observer who would call Robert for a frank conversation, and on the condition of anonymity, would ask him to say how he assesses his marriage, whether he is happy, Robert would answer positively, because, in principle, he is used to thinking that he is fine. He and Wendy are not a bad couple. Not the ideal woman, yes. Has it changed since you were a bride? Only ideals are only in fairy tales. But ideals are only in fairy tales, aren't they? And he's a little old for fairy tales in his 30s. And in this relatively contented state of marriage, Robert stayed for about 6 years. And then it went downhill. Like an avalanche, it mushroomed underneath, everything in its path. And what was the root cause? A lot of things. And then one day, Robert packed his suitcase. The pretext for leaving home was an imaginary business trip. In fact, Robert was not going to a neighboring city, but to other latitudes, to the sea. "Really?" Christina asked him enthusiastically. "Are you serious? You're not joking." "Who would joke like that?" Robert grinned, warmly, looking at the woman, at whose feet he was now ready to put not only the trip, but also many things, because she had become everything to him lately. And that woman was Robert's lover. And actually, if someone had told him a year ago that he would cheat, he would have laughed in that person's face. But life had decided otherwise. And this decision to have a mistress Robert made even before he met Christina, who worked in their office as his subordinate. She was a senior cleaner, or to put it more culturally, the head of the service company Sunrise, which decided that its own cleaning service is more reliable and profitable than hiring it from the outside from time to time. Not a big bird in theory, but Robert, for one thing, wasn't the kind of man who recognizes the strictures of social status. In the second place, you're charming, funny, and not belligerent. Christina was in love, it seems, with the entire staff. And to her credit, it was worth saying that she behaved decently and kept her distance with everyone except Robert. He himself couldn't quite understand why they'd gotten so close. "You're the real deal," Christina once said. "You've got it written all over your face." "Really?" he hummed confusedly. "And what did you read there?" "That you're unhappy in your marriage, and when you call your wife at lunchtime every day, "You look like a man who's forced to pull out a fireplace with his bare hands." Robert couldn't find anything to say in response because Christina was right. Lately, he'd been having a hard time with the obligatory good son role, and he wasn't the only one who owed everyone. He owed his parents to help build a cottage, to visit regularly, to tell them about life with Wendy. And in principle, the first was normal, because Robert understood that rest in the fresh air is necessary for a modern man. But the fact that his mother wanted to know details about family life, and then instructed him that he did not behave that way with his wife, that he should, and so to say, it was tense, but there was no way to avoid it. Otherwise, Mom grabbed at the heart. The son had grown up. She said sobbing mother is no longer needed in the trash and on the garbage dump. "So, son, don't you want to send me and my father to a nursing home?" Robert would get a kick out of it every time. If my father witnessed such a thing, he just rolled his eyes and grinned. "I've lived with her all my life, son," he said, and then he would try to calm his wife down. But Robert's mother was stubborn and knew how to take offense at the fact that someone did not obey her long and tastefully. Robert also owed a debt to the firm he worked for. However, it was understandable and natural. They give you money, you give them your professional skills. He was used to it. Everything was clear and normal here. And Robert owed Wendy, and he didn't realize it anymore, when he'd managed to become a debtor to her instead of a beloved husband. But lately she'd been going on and on about how tired she was of him getting up an hour early and rattling dishes while she made herself breakfast. From the way he pulls a blanket over her at night and coughs from what he sees as her dishwasher and multi-cook functions. They are women's favorites. That last one was actually funny and sad to the point of tears at the same time. "So let's divide up the chores," Robert suggested. "If you're tired, I'll help, of course." "I don't need anything else," Wendy replied. "I knew what I was getting into when I got married, but I thought you'd see me as a woman." Then Robert almost blurted out in reply that sometimes he saw in her, however, not the woman he loved, but the angry, a little hysterical, wild image. But of course he didn't say that and asked to clarify what was wrong. And it turned out that Wendy herself does not know. Gone is the romance. No more passion. And that's when he left home again, went to his parents' house. Only his father was there. Mom had gone to a distant relative. "You know, it's probably my fault. I opened up to my dad. I should have gone to more doctors to fix the problem. Maybe then she wouldn't have thought I was worthless." "You're not stupid," my father said. "You talk like that." The point was that Robert and Wendy had been unable to have a child throughout their marriage. And of course, they'd had a lot of tests that showed they were perfectly healthy. Doctors were throwing up their hands, and only one of them made a suggestion that it could be a matter of genetic incompatibility, but it's not accurate. And more research was needed. But Wendy adamantly refused. And when we got home from that last doctor, there was another scandal. And she said that maybe she couldn't get pregnant because she subconsciously felt insecure around Robert. "So should we get a divorce?" he asked. "Deef?" "No," replied Wendy. "After a long silence, I still love you. And I love you." "Hard as Glazunov," answered Robert, except that these magic words came so easily this time and somehow faded, as if he had said something banal, like "I love." "Blueberry jam." "Let's just live together," Wendy said then, looking into his eyes. "We're already married, aren't we?" Robert nodded silently, and they just went on living together. But that conversation had taken place almost 2 years ago, but it had been the starting point after which Robert had realized, deep down inside him, that something had cracked and fractured, and he would never be the same again. He tried to weigh everything judiciously. Should they really get a divorce? After all, just because a man and a woman got married didn't mean they had to live together all their lives. By default, this is a modern world, not a medieval one. But then he realized he really didn't want to break up with Wendy. Why not? If only because he's used to it. A family member. After all those years together. Yes, there were difficulties, but who doesn't have them? And then divorce is the need to divide the property, the apartment, for which the mortgage is paid, the car, which is also taken on credit. Divorce is a discord between relatives and friends who will take one side or the other. Divorce is pain. But who will guarantee that when they divorce, they will then meet people with whom they can create a better family than they had? There are no such guarantees, so Robert decides, well, they'll live together. And then maybe things would change. And then things did change, and he decided to cheat on his wife. The decision. It came unexpectedly, but mundanely, calmly. Just Robert suddenly heard colleagues talking about the fact that British scientists said that such a percentage of married couples cheat on each other. And Robert thought, what if his Wendy had had a lover for a long time? Maybe she does. And why wouldn't he find himself a woman? Take the edge off. No serious love, of course. But neither was living like this in a marriage that resembled breadcrumbs at the stage. Now he didn't have. He couldn't do it anymore. And then he turned his attention to Christina. They didn't start sleeping together right away. They just dated. You know, you're weird, Christina told him one day. It was summer, and they were walking in the park. And right now, they were up on a Ferris wheel to a height closer to where the birds fly. And I would have thought maybe even a maniac. Christina giggled. Why? Robert wondered. Because I read books about werewolves. That's sci-fi. Because you asked me out, but you've never kissed me, she said, like she meant it, but her eyes were warm and her lips were quivering. I was about to crack a smile. Or are you the kind of guy who doesn't need intimacy at all? It was strange, but Robert was embarrassed by the conversation. A grown man decides to have a mistress and is embarrassed when she talks about personal things. But isn't he stupid? But although he gave himself a mental smack, but outwardly held with a full sense of dignity. How can I be your mistress if there is nothing between us? Christina asked, looking him straight in the eye. And the wind brushed her blonde hair. But I can't call you a friend, answered at last. And then, one day we can have everything. One day, Christina grinned. What an amazing man you are. I like you for that, though. And now, she added with feigned courtly sternness, unless you want us to part when we go downstairs, just friends. Kiss me kissingly, vividly, and for real. Come on. And he kissed her, in a way that made her dizzy, and her breath rushed in a ridge of relaxed gold in his chest. And as they walked downstairs, stepping onto the ground, Robert realized he'd crossed the line. It wasn't just a dalliance anymore. He'd really cheated on his wife. And how disgusting it was, but at the same time cried inside a sweet feeling, as if with this vicious secret of his, he was paying Wendy in full for how cold, irritable, and uncomprehending she was. Yes, thought Robert, you've been ignoring me for too long, haven't you? Acting as if I were tied to you forever and had to listen to everything. What are you nagging me about? My wife. But it's not like that anymore. I'm free now, and I'll live my life as I choose. Our plane is preparing to make its final approach, so please fasten your seatbelts, and don't forget to look out the window. In front of you is the Pearl of the Seychelles, where an unforgettable vacation awaits you. The stewardess' sing-song speech of the charter flight that carried Robert and Christina to the resort came to an end, and many of the passengers clapped their hands. Just magical, Christina said once. Now that he was at a different point, Christina, he had no doubt whatsoever that he had made the right choice, flying to a vacation with Nancy, who was no longer the woman he had married long ago. It was a waste of money. As it is, he's not really committing anything that criminal. Yes, by accepted standards of morality, a man and a substitute for his wife is not a good man. But on the other hand, what about the fact that a wife can, over the years of marriage, literally push her spouse into it with her coldness, favor, and other flawed flaws? What is he, a slave to her to suffer? No way in hell. That was Robert's thinking. As they walked down the airplane ramp, went through customs, and fished their luggage out of the belt. And he was also thinking that perhaps, and probably, this little love adventure would help him decide to get a divorce. Yes, indeed, it would be better that way. Otherwise, he and Nancy would continue to live like this, as if they were incomprehensible. Too bad for spouses, and not good enough for friends. And then, maybe by separating, they could finally be happy on their own. Maybe. Perhaps she will find a man to suit her, and they will be compatible in everything, including the ability to bear a child. And he, Robert, looked fondly at Christina, who was raving about the surrounding scenery, taking pictures, and licking exotic-flavored ice cream. Coconut cactus. Want some? She offered him one. But Robert shook his head. He wouldn't risk such savagery. But the fact that he had tasted adultery almost once before, he liked it very much. When her husband left on a business trip, Wendy closed the door behind him and breathed a sigh of relief to finally be alone. Not that she was tired. Though yes, she was tired. Walking to the hall and bedroom, she opened the shutters, letting sparks of frosty fresh air into the rooms. Finally, she could get some fresh air. My husband was always grumbling that it was blowing. Asked me to close it. And Wendy thought, no need for a hearty hot meal tonight. She'd have enough yogurt and cookies. And then, since it was her day off, she could occupy the TV all evening to watch her favorite show, and some silly show. Not that her husband forbids it, but definitely the grumbling grandmother reminded her it's not the most intellectual vacation, and it would be better to watch this or that popular blogger who tell a story about space. Wendy only nodded and asked me not to try to bring her up anymore. Yeah, I'm not, Robert replied one day. I just want to get you interested in something. Why? She asked. Because people in a family should have common interests. Why? She repeated. A question, and with an unhealthy, as she herself realized, pleasure. Noticed that her husband began to get a little irritated. Yes, because when people live together, they should have something in common besides the payment of utility bills and the same bed, he added, suppressing 6 at the end, with the words that in this very bed, by the way, they have not had anything in the intimate plan for almost a year. But Robert didn't say that because he didn't want to rudely insult the woman he had once loved with all his heart and still respected. In a way, you can just live together. Wendy shrugged and went back to watching her show. We're a bunch of people in one house in the countryside where there wasn't a root vegetable garden, though. Tried to play farm life and build love. You having been voted in periodically by the viewers. Robert wrinkled his nose. Personally, he thought his wife was watching nonsense, and perhaps that's why she had become like that. Or maybe one didn't depend on the other. And he was just a snob with a prejudiced opinion, mixed with a quiet as a spectacle in the depths of the volcano-cooled, still lava dislike for the man he once loved. The bonds of affection for whom are now seen as chains, and the obligations of a close relationship as a burden. Previously, both parties. But be that as it may, Robert had not tried to instill his interests in Wendy for months, and was silent about how he himself spent his free time. Wendy only knew that he was fixing something there in the garage, helping a friend to collect old junk, proudly called retro car, and also goes to the rope park, where, of course, risked breaking his neck. Also, oh well, it's been done before anyway. Wendy was already used to taking her husband indifferently. It was better than worrying about them being estranged. Better to give each other freedom and just live side by side. Yes, it was possible. And Wendy had the example of her own parents in front of her. Molly and Sam had even divorced when Wendy was just a baby. But then, under pressure from relatives and realizing that their daughter needed a full family, they had come together. And even now, when she's grown up and left the nest, they're still together. Habit. Molly once explained the situation to her daughter. We just realized it was more peaceful. And you never regretted not finding love? Wendy asked. The conversation had taken place shortly before the wedding with Robert. Love grinned bitterly, Molly. What is it? Scientists say it's the hormones a person produces. But you and I are not teenagers to believe in that nonsense. Love can be a good thing at first to help you know what kind of person you want to be with. And then, when you've gotten used to it, you get used to it. It's okay if love passes, but there are still a lot of important things left to do. Even the most important things. Molly raised her finger emphatically. You know what I mean. The possessions that mutual friends have made together. The closeness in terms of having someone around to take care of you if anything. And you just live together because one person can't be close. And if you chase love, I'm sorry to be blunt. Like an animal, a man will love, fall out of love. And what? Split up. Destroyed the family. No, daughter, love is a fairy tale. It's a beautiful, brightly colored fruit, you know. But it's what's inside the fruit that counts. The flavor, cautiously suggested Wendy, who didn't quite get the gist of what her mother was telling her about vitamins. Molly grinned. You think? Carefully with squeamishness, said Wendy. Me and Robert might be the same way. I mean, one day we'll love each other. No one can predict, Molly replied. Otherwise, the world would be a trouble-free place. Hello. Yes, this is his wife. Wendy answered the phone from the office where her husband worked. 2 days after he left on a business trip, there was a pan frying turkey meatballs. Robert hated those, by the way. The husband did not understand how important it was to watch his health and demanded nightmarishly unhealthy cutlets with fatty pork and white bread. What do you mean it hurts? Oh, Wendy, no matter how their relationship went, but she did not show rigid indifference to her spouse. So he became alarmed when a colleague of Robert's began to inquire about his health. What do you mean? On sick leave. You sent him on a business trip, didn't you? Wendy sat down on a chair. A confused message was heard from the other side. And then Robert's colleague said that he knew that the man had said he was very sick, so he wouldn't be at work for 5 days. He would bring the certificates later, and he had not been sent on any business trip. We were afraid that there was an epidemic. A colleague chuckled nervously and explained that Christina had taken sick leave along with Robert. Wendy replied that no, her husband isn't home. He's gone in general, and she doesn't understand what's going on. The colleague from the other side hurriedly ended the conversation, only asking that as soon as Robert showed up, he was told that he was very much needed in the office, and an explanation for what the project at risk of disruption is also needed. From the kitchen came the distinct odor of fried food. It was time to take the cutlets off and send them off to finish cooking in the oven. But Wendy stood in the hall with the phone in her hand and frowned, trying to figure out what was going on. Then determinedly, she pressed the call to Robert's contact. Yes, he answered. What's wrong? I'm on the road. I told him not to bother you. Where are you? Wendy asked, and Robert was strangely silent. It seemed that in that silence, he knew what he knew. He'd been caught in a lie. Honey, I told you, the office called, said Wendy. You weren't sent on a business trip, Wendy, and I'll explain. Robert had taken the call as he stood on the quay and was now trying to find a quiet, secluded spot. There was a motley festival of local culture taking place on the island, and it was quite noisy. He was already regretting picking up the phone. Where are you? On a soap opera. Wendy, don't lie to me. Am I too young to tell you about my bare feet? Robert was bitten by some kind of insect. They said it's lice season on the island, and he wasn't expecting lice. The aggressive microphones made him very nervous and itchy. Why are you telling me with a Wendy? Gone somewhere. You what? What's that noise? There were girls and guys dancing around Robert who liked to palm their hands, a musical instrument like a drum. So you're in some kind of joint. Who do you think I am? Robert got mad. I don't drink at all. They're just dancers. Oh, that's what dancers are, girls. No, Wendy, you got it wrong. What's that noise out there? The hearing was terrible, but Wendy could make out something suspicious. You're at sea, Robert muttered. What are you? The kitchen no longer smelled very smoky from the kitchen. It was burning meat. You're at sea. You and your mistress have gone to a resort. The last one was spontaneous, And actually, Wendy didn't believe it because it would be a ridiculous and idiotic platitude. I guessed. Blurted out Robert, who was starting to get a little crazy from the scorching sun of the Marshak musicians who positively surrounded the tourist. Plus, this morning they'd been cheated out of money selling the Coral Reef tour. And although the loss was recovered thanks to the local police, the fallout remained. "I'm off to the sea with my mistress," said Robert. "What did you want me to do? Go on vacation with you? Does it hurt? I've had enough. We live worse than the neighbors. Why? I married you in the first place. You idiot. That you loved me." Smoke was coming from the kitchen besides the smell. Wendy was choking. Tears seemed to have accumulated in her whole being over the past years, but they couldn't find a way out. "I love you," she whispered, and she didn't end the call, just threw the phone hard into the wall. And the foam turned out to be very sturdy and didn't even crack. Nancy picked up the smartphone. Robert was breathing heavily. The artists realized that the tourists did not care about them, continued to move along the embankment. What have I done? The first thought flashed through my mind. It's her own fault. The second thought flashed. I should call her. Gnaw a question into her brain. No, let her cool off, and I'll do the same. And besides, Robert wiped his face clean of sweat. Now you have to think really hard about what to say, because it looks like he just destroyed his marriage. Wendy acted machine-like. She walked to the kitchen, took the skillet off the stove. You twisted the cold water faucet and stuck her dishes under the spray. The body finally gave in. Tears streamed down her face, and she felt a little better. Cheated, betrayed, heavy bells rang in my brain. Wendy went back into the hall after taking care of the frying pan. She lay down on the couch, curled up in a ball like a cat, and hugged the pillow, howled softly into it. It hurt. How can it hurt like that? Tearing something up inside if you're not physically ill. How can you want to fall through the ground, to dissolve into nothingness, and still be able to continue in your body? How could you love a person so much and hate them at the same time? She didn't catch that moment when she fell asleep, rather immersed in the heavy drama, the one her brain had sent her soul-suffering body into. And when Wendy opened her eyes, she realized it was 0 o'clock or evening still in the winter's early darkness. You can tell. The TV was still on. Wendy lost her eyes. The picture kept popping up. Must be because she cried a lot. Kevin the Tega master, famous in his day, had finally returned to his students, the journalist said. The boy completely in a funny gray hat, tied ears. Behind the boy's back stretched the humblest-looking village. What's in store for us? Cheerfully, we will finish with a red nose. He asked the audience. Will Kevin have new followers, or will some of the old ones follow the teacher who has returned from almost 10 years of confinement in a psychiatric hospital? Unfortunately, continued the journalist, shifting from foot to foot, we did not manage to communicate with the hero of our story. He, as before, leads the life of a recluse, but we will try to keep you informed. And if you want to know more about the mysterious master of the Tega, then be sure to watch the documentary, which you can find online at the portal. Wendy frantically grabbed the remote and turned off the TV, her pleas cold sweat, and not from hysteria. It was just that now the past, which she thought was long buried, suddenly appeared to her. The airplane soared into the sky. Robert leaned back tiredly in his chair. The last couple of days, that is, the end of the little vacation in the Seychelles, had not been easy for him, and most importantly, he had ruined it all himself. After all, if only he hadn't answered his wife's call, he would have called her back later. For example, from the hotel room. Then, perhaps, it would have been possible to compose a true lie, and everything would have been fine, at least for those couple days. But Robert held back from ruining Christina's vacation and told her everything just before the return flight. So now she knows all about us, the young woman sighed. Your hands are icy cold, she said, drawn across the windowsill chair and wrapped her fingers around his palm. So we should get together and talk about everything. What? Robert, rounding my eyes. You want to meet my wife? Have you forgotten what we talked about? I squinted my eyes reproachfully. Christina, I told you from the beginning I don't want to spend a few years as a married man's mistress. We're trying to build a relationship together. And if all goes well, we reveal the whole truth. Divorce is all serious and honest. Yes, I remember, nodded Robert. They had that arrangement. And because of it, by the way, he had even more respect for Christina. A serious woman, not willing to torture the other side for years for nothing, making everyone live a lie. Except, but technically Robert's lips trembled in a nervous smile. We never became lovers in that very sense. I know, Christina grinned, and lingered even closer than she'd poked him on the cheek. And I kept wondering what was the point of getting a room for two and sleeping in separate beds. And I thought that here in this corner of Christina we could bond, take our relationship to the next level. But you're right. We're not technically lovers, but we're not really friends anymore. Any normal woman would start twiddling her thumbs. That we spend time together, that we have dinner, that we kiss, that we vacation together. She'd consider all that cheating. The full ones. And we don't even need a bed. Besides, even if we say nothing happened, you know she won't believe us. Yeah, Robert sighed. It's just that it's all so sudden. And you compare it to a sore tooth that could have hung around for months, but had to be pulled. Christina offered a not the most apt, but vivid parallel. Unpleasant, unexpected. But then you can forget about it. Robert knocked on the door a second time. He had his own keys, of course, but he would have preferred to enter the apartment so that Wendy would let him in. But she wouldn't open the door or answer the phone. It was understandable, though. Robert would not have been surprised to find the apartment empty. That is, the absence of his wife's things. And then to find her at her parents'. He was morally prepared that Wendy would tell about the affair to all relatives and acquaintances, and it would start. But for what he discovered when he opened the door with his own key, entered the apartment, he wasn't prepared at all. What is this? Christina pressed her palm to her mouth, and with her other hand pointed to the wreath. A funeral black wreath stood in the hallway, and on the ribbon was the name Wendy. No, dropping her travel bag on the floor. Robert, swaying as if drunk, strode down the corridor into the hall. Wendy, he thought he screamed, but in fact he whispered. Other tragic signs were found here. Mingled with the black cloth of the platinum cabinet mirror, on the joint photos stood black ribbons on the high pedestal, and carnations scattered on the floor. No. Robert clutched his hands in his hair. He looked around hysterically, as if he expected Wendy to materialize out of thin air, and it would all turn out to be some monstrous mistake, some stupid misunderstanding. She, Christina, was about the same shock. No one called you from the family. No sobbing, like Robert. The thought went through her head that something had happened to her. Maybe her heart burst from grief. He'd heard of such things, and he didn't know if his Wendy was real. Wendy's family. She'd died, and he hadn't been told, hadn't seen fit, because he cheated. Robert. He shuddered in his bitter stupor, didn't immediately realize what was happening. Christina was waving her hand in front of his eyes and pointing at the phone. It was Wendy's phone. It was ringing. The caller ID was signed as Mom. Yes, Robert took the call. He waited to hear something that would confirm his fearful hunch. Robert, son, Molly spoke in her usual good-natured manner. Tell her to call me anyway. What? Robert pressed his hand to his chest. His heart was heavy, booming somewhere in his throat. Molly answered from the sanitarium. Or else she's gone and got some milk. No, let her call me and tell me normally what they feed there, what procedures there are. I mean, why the treatments? Christina's eyes widened. She also obviously wanted to understand what the conversation was about. Robert, after a couple of minutes, when he gave out only aha and aha, plus also necessarily Molly Vasilievna, finally ended the conversation and turned to the almost mistress with a silly face. She, living in the morning with her mother, said in the sanatorium left. And what is this? Christina waved his hands. How? But what does it mean? I don't know. Robert sat down on the couch with 2 fingers, putting the carnation aside. "This is crazy," he muttered. "She's alive, so it's this one. Go ahead, dial her again from her cell phone." Robert scratched his head, then recounted the conversation with his mother-in-law to Christina in detail. From the words of Molly, and Wendy went to a country sanatorium to improve her health over the weekend, which she additionally took time off work. She said that the sanatorium is necessary because the doctor advised so. Yes, also just wants to relieve stress and will take her phone with her. But the other one's not a smartphone. It's got buttons, but he will almost never use it because the psychologist advises minimum communication even with family and maximum focus on himself. "Only understand the point," said Robert. "My wife has never seen a psychologist. I suggested it to her myself. I told her that there were specialists in family relations, but she didn't understand it." "You know," Christina said thoughtfully, twirling something in her hands and then holding it out to Robert, who took it and frowned. It turned out to be a booklet of the sanatorium Cedar Grove, which told about luxury outdoor recreation in high comfort. "Look, there's an address and directions," Robert said, running his finger along one side of the booklet. "So she went to the sanatorium after all," Christina said, confused. "But what's this all about?" "I have no idea." Robert got up. "But I'll find out. I'm going after her." "I'm with you, and don't you dare object." Christina raised her hand warningly. "After all, it's my fault too. I'll tell your wife myself that nothing happened between us." That now Robert was at a loss. "And I thought, I don't know what's wrong with her head." Christina stepped carefully over the nail. "But a normal person wouldn't do that. She's definitely having a nervous breakdown. And we're responsible for that. So let's get to the bus station. It's in the Cedar Groves by the Elks Antlers. But I think we'll get there soon." Robert tried to call his wife on the second number while we were getting there, but she was already picking up. He whispered in agonized anticipation, listening to one dial tone after another. And then suddenly they were gone too. Now the caller was temporarily unavailable. And Robert finally reached the sanatorium. And on first impression, it was a decent place. It was located in the suburbs, was really surrounded by cadders and their other warriors of trees. "Hello, Robert." I flew up to the reception desk. "Good morning." Smiled at the girl behind the counter. "Welcome." "I'm not on vacation. I'm looking for my wife," Robert blurted out. "I'm sorry," the girl behind the counter said, embarrassed. "I don't quite understand you." Robert tried to explain that his wife had come here and he needed to talk to her urgently. Family business. They had a fight and he's worried she might be a little out of sorts. "I'm sorry, but we don't share information about our guests with third parties." The girl took a chance. "What third party?" Robert was indignant. "I'm her husband." "Good afternoon. There's a problem. There's a new character at the front desk. The receptionist is a very polite and equally repulsive-looking man in a suit. He too remained deaf to Robert's requests and demands, and recommended him to contact his wife in any way he could, but not by trying to rage in their sanatorium. Robert, however, was stubbornly adamant. "So, man," I tried a nice way. The mask of politeness fell off the receptionist's face. "You're about to get kicked out by security. Get out." "Pardon me for interrupting, but you're Wendy's husband. Maiden name Snigger." Robert turned around glumly, ready for someone else to show up who will prevent him from finding his wife. The man standing next to him did not look like a sanatorium employee. Rather, he looked like a scientist, such a classical intellectual, who came to write a clever book in the quiet countryside for inspiration. Jeans, plaid beer shirt, over blonde, slightly gripped hair, square glasses. He looked to be about 35 years old. "Yes, there was always Snigger," Robert replied. "Do you know her?" In a way, the blonde man hummed. "We can talk." "It's okay," he said, to the receptionist, who was apparently one step away from calling security. "These are my friends. Let's go. You see, I was just walking by and happened to hear a familiar name." "That's what happened?" Robert asked his wife. calling her by her maiden name because she kept it after the wedding. There was a little scandal about it, by the way. Wendy's mother-in-law took offense, considered it disrespectful to her son. But Robert did not insist. He understood and accepted that Wendy wanted to keep her last name. "My name is Noah." The new acquaintance introduced himself. "And you are?" He looked questioningly at Christina, "My acquaintance, Christina." Christina said, as if she were just an acquaintance, stepping next to him. After passing the hotel lobby, they entered a pretty room with an abundance of live plants. It looked like a winter garden, and they were seated in a corner behind a projecting part of the wall. Everyone on a sofa and an armchair. "How do you know my wife?" Robert was quick to ask. "She's here. You know, I've been seeing her for a while. Let's clarify a few things to prevent misunderstandings. I don't know Wendy personally, but let's just say I was familiar with her personality." In a certain sense, it's like Robert frowned. "I don't understand." "You know, it was a big surprise to me myself to hear that she might have shown up here." Noah, taking off his glasses, took a handkerchief out of his pocket and began to wipe them carefully. "You see, I'm a psychiatrist, trained in Switzerland, and practiced there for a while. And then I decided to come here. To be more precise, I was brought here by a patient. I have been treating him for a long time, but my colleagues told me about the unexpected development of this case. Let me start in order." Noah started off by explaining that he wasn't really a foreigner. His mother was Russian, but his father was a foreigner in the full sense of the word Austrian. Then, years ago, Noah, in the course of his work, acting as a colleague and assistant to a more experienced specialist, encountered one difficult case, which turned out to be a man in his 40s named Kevin. He had come to Switzerland for work. He had a good qualification as a welder, and for a few years he worked diligently for a construction company. But then, in fact, it all started with the appeal of his employer, who was concerned about the strange behavior of his subordinate. The fact was that Kevin, previously characterized by silent network and even withdrawn, suddenly became very active in communicating with others to convey their ideas. It turned out that he decided to found his own, figuratively speaking, cult. Kevin represented himself as its leader, hereditary sorcerer, having great power in the world of spirits. The essence of the doctrine composed. Kevin was that modern man suffers a lot and lives badly because he departed from the covenants of the ancestors and denied the unity with nature. And to be saved, it is necessary to restore all this. But the practical part, the essence of salvation, was seen not in the fact that, for example, people should treat nature more carefully, take care of their families, take care of their relatives. Not at all. First of all, he believed that it was necessary to starve, as well as absolutely obey him, because he has a connection with the spirits of nature, and he can request for them. Man has many different and good things, but above all cleansing on an energetic level. Kevin left his job and disappeared one day, but he was quickly found. It turned out that he had moved to some local village, where, strangely enough, he found followers. But Kevin didn't live in the village itself. He moved into an abandoned cabin in the woods. The employer went to him, and in the company of local environmentalists, because this house stood on the territory of the reserve, and no outsiders were supposed to be there. And Kevin, well, it turns out this madman got it from somewhere. Wolverine kept her in a cage as a pet, and then let her down on uninvited guests. Anyway, we didn't have a quiet conversation, and from the one that did take place, it was clear that Kevin was out of his mind. He declared himself the master of the Taiga, although, strictly speaking, there was no Taiga in Switzerland. That's how Kevin ended up in the local psychiatric clinic. He was declared insane. He spent several years there for treatment, and then he was deported. It's been years. Wait, Robert interrupted the narrator impatiently. But what does this have to do with my wife? You know where your wife was when she first turned 18? With a soft and sad smile, asked Noah. Well, of course I do. Then she would have started Robert, but he immediately stopped talking, thinking. She wanted to go abroad after school to study. I remember Grant telling me she won. Yeah, she was an honor student, and her parents helped with the money, and he's in over his head. She went to university in Switzerland. Yeah, we met after she got back from there. She came back very quickly. She hadn't been there 3 months. But what happened? You know, don't you? Robert looked anxiously at Noah and continued. Then Kevin went into the clinic for a reason. If he hadn't been recognized as mentally ill, he would have faced serious consequences. As a result of being charged with many crimes, including the fact that they're in the wooded abandoned cabin, it turned out he wasn't alone. The thing was that 2 months before the cult of the Master of the Taiga collapsed from one university, a girl Russian student who had come to study to be a designer disappeared. Her friend said she had gone to see the local beauty and was going to hitchhike back. They discouraged her, but for some reason she was convinced that Switzerland was a very safe country and nothing would happen to her. But as it turned out, it was this girl Wendy who was found in the gatehouse with Kevin. She was his niece, but by the time she was rescued, he had already taken the chain off her because he had achieved his goal of breaking the poor girl's psyche. The thing was that Kevin dreamed of having many wives. He said that to exchange energy with nature, he needed at least 20 young beauties, and the first was 18-year-old Wendy. But she never said anything like that. Robert exhaled in shock. I didn't know that. It's the kind of story many people prefer to forget and not share with others. Noah grinned mirthfully. Have you heard of Stockholm Syndrome? Asked Noah. Robert shook his head. It's when the victim of an ordinary kidnapping begins to sympathize with his teacher over time, to understand his motives, to feel guilty about what happened. Noah was calmly explaining to Robert the nature of the trouble. What had happened to Wendy? After her release, she spent several months in a clinic where she was helped to literally piece back together her shattered personality. And then Wendy came home. Her parents said she just changed her mind about studying abroad, saying she couldn't handle the program and decided to change careers altogether, Robert said. But why didn't she tell me anything, even after the wedding? Because it's easier to forget about this nightmare. Few people are willing to go back to it, even mentally, even if it means opening up to those closest to them, Noah said. You said your patient brought you here. Breaking the somber silence that had fallen over the small company, Christina. You were talking about Kevin or Wendy. I'm afraid. Perhaps it's about both now, Noah said thoughtfully. The thing is, Kevin's back after so many years in the doldrums. He's trying to start a cult again, but now he's just the local weirdo around here for now. It's like he's not doing anything wrong. I mean, a man has a right to believe what he wants to believe, right? But I'm afraid he'll go beyond that. I'm afraid he's even more dangerous now. And for all I know, he's here, the sanitarium. Round my eyes. Robert? No, somewhere in one of the villages around here or in the woods, Noah said. And your wife, what did you say about her coming here? Her strange behavior. Perhaps she would have heard the chase, or he contacted her himself, and he wants her back. And she wanted that too. Though I'll admit, it's all rather odd. And something else happened. It's hard to deal with. But Robert, and then talked about what they found in the apartment when they returned. Very interesting, Noah thought. But in principle it could be explained. It probably symbolizes that Wendy has decided to break with her past life, to sort of die to the world. Now I'm sure she didn't come here by accident. She's looking for Kevin. And maybe she's already found him. And tell me if she's had any major upheavals recently, any severe emotional distress. Robert. He felt uncomfortable under the doctor's piercing gaze. He hesitated, then answered, No, everything was fine. I was just away from home on a business trip and then came back. Back, he corrected cheerfully. And here we are, me and Christina. A coworker I know. We're looking for Wendy, my wife, now. I see, said Noah, and Robert had the strange feeling that Dr. Steele had looked right through him and didn't believe what he said. What do we do? Christina asked. Who do we call? Who can help us? I think right now we can and should act on our own, said Noah. After all, if right now Kevin isn't violating anything, if he hasn't kidnapped anyone else, then technically the man can do anything. So I think it's best we find him to start with. And as for your wife, I don't suppose she's here at the sanitarium. Unsure if I'd ever seen her here, I'd have noticed and remembered. Although, of course, I might have missed something. But I don't think she's here. And you know what? Is there any other place to start looking? I've been meaning to go there myself. It's the Village of Hedgehogs. What a nice name, huh? Christina smiled. When do we go? Best right now, Noah got up. I have to pack. I'll be quick. Did you have a car? No, sighed Robert. What, are you stuck in mine? I rented a car, said Noah. The road to the village was fast and easy. It had been cleaned and was in good condition. There was silence on the road. Everyone had something to think about. Christina was reflecting on the fact that she had no intention of becoming the disciple of a happy family at all, and she would never have become the mistress of a married man if he had been doing well. But Robert, after all, he had said that he and his wife had been living as neighbors for a long time, and that it was mutual, that they had no feelings. And so her affair with Robert Christina saw in the long run as something positive not only for herself, but also for Wendy. After all, after the breakup, she could certainly meet another man with whom she would be happy. And that was weird. But right now, her own former views didn't seem so right to Christina anymore for some reason. She realized that, in fact, it was a flawed idea to break into the family, no matter what Robert said. If he was already divorced, then it would be possible to make love with a clear conscience. But as it was a bad thing. Hedgehog Village had once been a thriving place, but now there are mostly old people left here and very few young people. From the sanatorium to it was a short drive of less than half an hour, and since they didn't know how long it would take, Noah suggested to Robert and Christina that they get a room at the sanatorium. Fortunately, there were rooms available, and they immediately paid for their stay for 3 days. The girl at the reception desk looked suspiciously, but did not say anything, and she gave out the keys to 2 rooms. And what to do next? Christina drummed her fingers nervously on her knee. Just knock on houses and talk to people. Luckily, I found out something, Noah said. Turns out he managed to search social media for locals and found someone. A kid named Christopher. This teenager was into computer games, but did well in school, and even won the Olympics in biology. He lived part of the time in the city with his father and mother, and for vacations he came to the village where he lived with his grandfather. I signed up with him, Noah said. The boy sought help on the internet, joined groups where young people share problems in their relationships with their parents. He's in trouble. The mother and father believe Kevin. I wrote that I was the man's former primary care physician. Christopher is a smart boy, grinned Noah. He didn't believe me right away. He demanded a scan of my diploma to confirm that I'd worked in Switzerland. He also said he wouldn't pay me any money. He'd had enough of one crook in his family. Anyway, we talked, and we're on our way to see him right now. Grandpa Christopher's house was at the very edge of the village. When the little company knocked on the gate, a huge dog came out of the box, and it was off the chain, and in fact it looked like a pure wolf. Robert shrieked with fright and almost ran away. I found a place out of the house in my slippers and threw them over my shoulders, and a skinny, tall teenager came out in a tulip. Noah, he said with a squint, approaching and opening the wicket. First time I've seen a foreigner. Nice to meet you. Noah replied with a smile and shook Bora's hand firmly. And who is that with you? Asked the young man, a little suspiciously. Psychiatrists do. Will you catch him together? Christopher's eyes lit up with excitement. Not exactly, Noah hummed and introduced his companions. Wow, said Christopher at the fact that Kevin probably had a willing captive. Let's go inside. It's frosty today, and Grandpa and I have just put the samovar on. The invitation was accepted by all with great pleasure. True, Robert was only glad to be warm, and so a piece of food was not in his throat. Christopher's grandfather, Sebastian, turned out to be a sturdy old man about 70 years old with a decent tail. He welcomed the guests cordially and took Noah very seriously, saying that they could use help with this scourge. "Yeah, he was here the other day," Sebastian said. "Kevin, this one, went to get him to go door to door with Stephen." "That's my Christopher's father. Stephen is his father's name. You see, they wanted to talk to people. This journalist is still curious. I told them, 'Why are you filming him? Can't you see he's crazy and you're trying to stir him up?' What's it to the journalists? Are they filming themselves? I think this sectarian got Stephen drunk. And a drunk man, you know what I mean." Sebastian was coughing. "You just pour ideas into his head and he's happy to carry them. Maybe he's also a hypnotist. What do you think?" Sebastian looked questioningly at Noah. "I'd say he has a dark charisma, but no hypnotic powers," he replied. "So that makes two of them. Where do they live? Do we know?" "There is a version of it." Sebastian scratched his snow-white beard thoughtfully. "In the woods. Back in the 90s, a businessman wanted to build a house, almost built it, but he didn't live there. He disappeared. Well, there are ruins there. I don't know how to live there, but things happen. Sectarians." The old man waved his hands. "They are capable of anything." Suddenly, the door of Senya in the main room of the house ajar, and in it woke up a dog's muzzle eyes flashed yellow. "Nada is a good girl." Christopher beckoned the beast with that sausage, and when she approached, fearlessly sliced the treat, handed it to the toothy mouth. "What an interesting breed," said Robert, to whom it seemed that besides sausage this creature was interested in something else in this room, or rather to say him. "What breed?" Grandfather waved his hand. "Her mother ran away in the woods once. Took a long walk. I was thinking of getting a new dog, but she came back and brought the only puppy she had." "I think so," grinned the old man. "No other way than with a wolf. She made friends. She looks a lot like the Volga she found. I took her to the vet once, and everyone in town ran away from us, even though she was wearing a muzzle." Robert was also ready to run away, and in different directions at the same time, because Nada suddenly decided to sniff him, and the expression on her face became somehow squeamish. And then he sneezed. The dog Wolf grunted and muffled. "She doesn't like you," Christopher said, but calmly and even cheerfully. "That's all right. She doesn't like many people at all. You're her type, though," the boy added, watching Noah scratch the animal behind the ears and wag his tail. "Oh, how cute." Christina smiled and took the opportunity to stroke the obvious predator. Christina snuggled up to Noah, and Robert knew it was strange and silly to feel that way. But he felt a pang of jealousy. Had he noticed that Christina was acting differently in the company of this style doctor? Flirtatious or something? Could it be that? Because he's a foreigner. And there was nothing intimate between him and Christina. They hadn't really started a serious relationship, but the prick of jealousy from logical reasoning never went away. "So we should go to the woods," Noah said, "and maybe we can settle this quietly, without too much trouble or fuss." He had no time to speak before the door of the house behind the drums, and somehow there was a sense of urgent, pressing need for this post. Or maybe there was trouble. Christopher went to open the door, and returned a minute later with a woman in her 40s. She had a crying face and a completely insane look. "And here is the victim of our #1 sectarian." Sebastian's grandfather pointed at her with both hands. "My daughter. Here she is, Dr. Jenna. And we have a psychiatrist, by the way, from Switzerland, and knows your guru of 3 days," continued the old man, not hiding the snide. "My daughter has already grown big, and it's too late to bring you up, but out of respect for mine, be kind enough to sit down. Listen to what the learned man has to say. You have a lot of interesting things to say about Kevin the psychopath." Sebastian turned to Noah. He was about to answer, but Jenna, having finally regained her breath, blurted out first, "Daddy, I was wrong. "Oh, Daddy, what a fool I was." And the woman sobbed. "You sit down. Christina, please sit down." "Who are you?" asked Jenna, taking the advice to sit down. "An acquaintance of mine," said Robert, "and I'm the husband of a woman who seems to be a prisoner of this sect again." "But what's going on?" "Dad?" asked Jenna, wiping her nose with a handkerchief. Then Christopher briefly outlined the situation to the mother. "So what happened? Where's Dad?" "I told you not to talk to that psycho," the teenager resented. "He's like hypnotizing. And you all, that this secret knowledge will help teach you how to live." "Well, I figured it out. Did you realize that? Who you messed with? And adults are smart." "You on the mother, not on the gray," shook his head old man. "And not such adults and smart in a hat are sometimes in sex." "Jenna, you explain calmly what happened, and then we'll think together. That's what we're here for." Jenna told everything, confused and embarrassed. This woman had a good education. She'd studied at a teacher's college. Now she confessed that she simply did not understand how she could fall for all this, how she and her husband could so easily believe in all this nonsense that Kevin had. He said he knew the means to cure a man of all diseases, how to gain even immortality. He said that telepathy and many other abilities are inherent in every human being. But the modern world is not allowed to reveal this potential. But he knows how to fix it. You know, it was like an obsession. Jenna splashed her hands. "It's like you're becoming a different person. And I'm so ashamed to admit it, but you kind of rise above all the other people because you know the truth. You have a mentor, I mean a master. And they are them. That is, all other people don't understand anything. They are stupid. But you realize that you were wrong." Noah gently took Jenna's hand lightly, squeezing her fingers. "How did it happen?" "Kevin was at our house." Jenna lowered her eyes. "Christopher had already left here to visit his grandfather, and my niece came over to visit. And Kevin. Anyway, I realized he was interested in her. I mean, he started talking to her all of a sudden. I realized he wanted her to believe him too. And then, wow, what a horror. Anyway, I got the girl out quickly. Told her she better go now. You know, I was just in shock." Jenna gave me a pleading look. "After that, Kevin told me off. And he and my husband also started talking about how Kevin has this idea that he needs young girls to keep his body's energy balanced. He said that his followers who proved themselves faithful would also have access to girls, that he, as a teacher, would reward his faithful servants. And that's when I realized what we'd gotten ourselves into. I just can't believe my husband would go along with any of this. We had a fight with him. He said he would become Kevin's most loyal disciple. He would get younger and grow new teeth and a new liver because Kevin would teach him something. My husband said that it is impossible to interfere with him, and I am his enemy against the fact that he then, under the control of the teacher with young girls, energy magical produce. And that's when the madness became clear to me. Mom, I'm going to interrupt Dad, Christopher said, and Jenna, hearing this, shrieked softly and cried and began to say that it was wrong. After all, it's Dad, and he's just misguided. Then she added that that wasn't all. Kevin wanted the apartment signed over to him. And Jenna's husband agreed. He wrote a deed of gift for his share of half the apartment. You know, it just goes to show that in his line of work, Kevin belongs to a well-known, shall we say, type of sect leaders, Noah said. Usually, it is hardly the main thing they need from their subordinates to be given money and property. Mantis is let's be strong. Okay, said Christopher, and then turned to the others. What to do? You can't just sit around and wait to see what happens next. We gotta get this bastard. You take it easy, kid, said Robert. I understand everything, but let's not panic and no hasty decisions. If you are careful for a long time, Grandpa Sebastian said thoughtfully, the fish will eat the bait and swim away. What am I saying? I think we should visit someday. Like, right away and without any curtsies. After all, he's got at least 2 people coming out now, right? He's bent his fingers. Your wife, Robert, that's one. And my son-in-law, that's two. So there's a good reason we're family. So we got a right to worry about family people. It's winter. Now you understand. The sun has risen, and it's already sunny. So it's better to go in the morning. And besides, I have a friend here. He's a smart guy. He's an experienced hunter, too. I'll ask him to help you. He'll be back in the village tomorrow. I'll talk to him. So we'll just wait. Robert was indignant. As long as my wife is with it. If Kevin hasn't changed much, Noah reassured him, then your wife is relatively safe. He's probably giving her very long lectures. I mean, all that nonsense about his teachings. Kevin likes to take a long time to process people he needs something from, and what he needs from my Wendy. Robert asked grimly. The same thing he needs from this family, I suppose. The psychiatrist nodded at Jenna. He just intends to take over someone else's property. Sebastian insisted that there was no need for anyone to return to the sanitarium. There was enough room in his house to accommodate everyone in a slightly cramped, but quite cozy overnight stay. Noah agreed to the proposed plan. Christina supported him warmly, and Robert once again noted how quickly she had changed the object of her affections. That is, he knew in his mind that their affair was already over, but it was still unpleasant. She could not, at least for the sake of decency, not flirt so blatantly under his nose. Robert woke up in the morning, but at an hour when it was still dark outside the window. Lying on his back, he stared at the ceiling. He could not get it out of his head that Wendy, his sweet, kind Wendy, was now at the mercy of some madman who could do anything to her. I'll wait for you, of course, he muttered quietly under his breath. Robert, rising cautiously, he realized how Sebastian would go to talk to the man in the morning. It would be a while before that hunter would be their guide. Maybe another 24 hours. Robert began to pack, and he did it quietly, because he did not want anyone to stop him. He didn't intend to wait any longer. And let this Noah, this brain-dead right-winger from Switzerland, the scholarly type. But only he, Robert, is a man and a man's man, not a wimp, to sit still if he's told to. And that's why he's gonna go and save his wife right now. End of story. Like save her, but he's gonna bash that Kevin's head in. Robert remembered what Sebastian said about landmarks. If you stick to the clearing and go strictly north, then reach the big rocks, and there turn left past the frozen lakes, there would be this house. Before leaving the house, Robert thought for a moment. Sebastian might have some kind of weapon. He could use it. But on the other hand, he had never handled one in his life. And so Robert decided to go as he quietly walked out of the yard. Nada, getting out of her fortified box, gave the man a thoughtful look, and then, unnoticed by the pursued man, followed him. Her father was a real wolf after all, and she resembled him not only in appearance, but also part of her essence. When everything happened, when the merciless reality crushed Wendy and made her feel infinitely alone and simply destroyed, she would, if only she had been allowed, have given anything for salvation, whoever offered it, and whatever the price. And in those moments when the journalist on TV was talking about Kevin, the young woman's world turned upside down a second time. It was as if she was falling in weightlessness, and at the same time frozen in the void. A past that had been forgotten came flooding back. Peace, security, calmness, detachment from the problems of the real world. For there was Kevin, who had promised to take care of her. During those weeks spent in a psychiatric clinic in Switzerland, many specialists worked with young Wendy. And how did she resist their attempts to get inside her head? She resisted what they convinced her of. That Kevin was a torturer. He had broken her mind, subjugated her will. And then she realized it all. And the release came like a breath of fresh, ice-cold air. She remembered as a doctor, one of the assistants of a gray-haired elderly professor. I think his name was Noah. He had suggested that she could stay now voluntarily, and they would continue the treatment. They would help her to be completely free of the destructive program that Kevin had planted in her mind. But then there were the parents, who demanded that her daughter must hurry back home and she didn't need any foreign clinic. She just had to come home and everything would be all right. And Wendy did. She refused psychotherapy as well as special medications. She believed she could cope without all that. The years flew by. Her parents didn't like to talk about it, and she herself thought it was a shameful stain on her foolish youthful past. But now the TV screen showed Kevin's face. How had he aged, changed over the years? His quiet voice promised salvation and the joy of oneness with nature. The discovery of the great mysteries. Her voice, as if to strike and caress at the same time, attracted like a magnet and frightened me into madness. "I am alone," said aloud to Wendy, rising from the couch. "No one needs me. I'm lost to this world." She suddenly realized what she must do. She must go back. After all, it had been a monstrous mistake to keep them apart. And he would help her again, show her the way, protect her, open her up with his care. Wendy didn't pack for a long time, just called her mother. Then she went to the ritual store and did what the image helped her to say goodbye to her home and her old life. Then she took a bus to the village of hedgehogs. And from there, with the help of a couple of concerned people, I found Kevin's house. It was amazing. But when he opened the door, he recognized her immediately. "Wendy," said. He smiled toothlessly. "My girl, how have I missed you?" And she fell into his arms with a sob. And then the door closed, and Wendy's world turned upside down for the third time. Now she was falling into a nightmarish slump of oblivion, losing herself with every breath. The winter forest greeted Robert in what appeared to be a welcoming manner. Her feet stepped lightly through the fluffy snow, which disappeared with silver and diamond chips. There were tits and some other birds around, and even the frost barely bristled, but the sleuths. Robert cheerfully imagined finding the home of the wacky hermit, breaking in, kicking the door in with his foot. And then, but there should probably be a fight between them like between a bad guy and a good guy in a Hollywood action movie. And then, of course, he's alive and not badly hurt. He will take his wife by the hand, say that she forgives her for everything, and they will go out of the woods together. This fantasy made me feel sweet in my chest, and for some reason, it sounded in my stomach. Yeah, I get it, Robert. It wasn't the thoughts. It was the fact that he hadn't had breakfast. He'd gone out. But it also seemed like it was rumbling in the stomach of someone who was following him or not. What was that strange sound anyway? Robert suddenly swallowed hard and turned around very slowly. Behind him stood the wolf. "Nada," he said. "Good girl." The animal cocked its head and cocked its ears and bared its fangs, as if to say that a good girl was definitely not for him, and quietly grumbled, snarling, "Nada." Robert vaguely remembered that with wolves and dogs, it seems, you can't run away with your back turned to them. He was also confused. Why was she following him? Why? Yesterday everything had been fine. However, it was still worth remembering that, according to Sebastian, in this animal genes mixed in half-pet and the age-old enemy of man, fearless wolf. And so some hustle and bustle in the woods ensued, as well as a clumsy chase, with the clumsiness in it 110% attributable to Robert. Two creatures, a man and a dog with a dash of wolf, ended up near an abandoned lodge in the woods. And actually, Robert had hoped Nada would leave soon. Really? All right. She got in her head and chased him off. But then she'd have to get back to her master. Robert remembered what Sebastian said about Nada being the smartest animal. He said he would not leave home for long. Generally very attached to the house, so I do not put on chains. But now, sitting in the gatehouse, Robert very much doubted the intelligence and kindness of this animal. And it was doubly sickening because he was stuck here, and he had to save his wife. And all the others have no idea where he had gone, and what would happen next. Robert asked himself the thoughtful question. Meanwhile, other events were unfolding in another part of the forest. "We shouldn't have done that, of course, hero. We are going to the lair to the maniac," said John and pulled warm gloves on his hands. He had just finished digging into the engine of one of the two snowmobiles. He had just finished digging into the engine of one of the two snowmobiles and seemed to have fixed the problem. John had known the Sebastian family intimately for a long time. He was also well aware of the fact that a strange type of sectarian propaganda was coming to his home village, so he agreed to help right away. And the only thing that embarrassed him was the haste and the fact that the small company was hardly prepared for dangerous surprises. "We are lucky," said Noah. "Kevin is mad in part, but he is rather cowardly and would hardly risk open conflict with 3 people," said Christopher indignantly. He was strictly told to stay home with Sebastian, who said he was too old for that. As for Christopher's father, he was definitely no longer Kevin either. He called Jenna early in the morning and started apologizing and saying what an idiot he was. It turned out that he had just at some point, woken up and realized what he had done. And so, having got out of the forest, Stephen in general during this time managed to get to the city, and now he was staying with his parents, who lied to him that they just quarreled with his wife. But they had already made up. Stephen, of course, was asked if he had seen a girl in Kevin's house, and he said that yes, someone had come. And Kevin introduced her as an old acquaintance of his, but nothing more was known to him. Jenna, of course, hurried into town. She had to support her husband, who had finally stopped his nonsense, and she also had to consult a lawyer about how to cancel the gift written in haste and under the pressure of sectarians. Christopher flatly refused to stay, just to sit with his grandfather. He said that if necessary, he would jump out of the window and run barefooted after him. Only they won't go into the woods without him. "I'm allowed. I'm an adult," he said, proudly drinking his lower lip and flashing his eyes like an angry little child. "And how old are you?" asked Noah. 16. "Then there are no questions," grinned the doctor. "All right, you're coming with us. But promise you'll obey." Agreed. Christopher said yes, and really did what he was told, and silently rode in the second and snowmobile with John. The other vehicle was occupied by Noah and Christina. Robert's disappearance, of course, did not go unnoticed and at first even caused panic. But Sebastian made a correct assumption that he decided not to delay in rescuing his wife and went into the woods alone. And because of that, one must be in a great hurry. And then there was Nada. The old man sighed. "Maybe it's after him." "Why?" Raised an eyebrow at Noah. "Yes, why?" "I know," Sebastian said. "She's so smart. I'm afraid of her sometimes." "Maybe she thought he needed help." "I don't know," said Christopher. "He's kind of scared of her. And for good reason. Our Nada is a great dog." "I can confirm that," grinned John. "So, smart too. Last year, when we went duck hunting together, remember, Sebastian, but we thought it was Nada who was spoiling the hunt for us, jumping and barking. But then we realized it was her leading us on. She's beckoning us to follow her. And what do you think, John? As any self-respecting storyteller, the hunter held a spectacular pause. It turns out that she was calling us to the swamp. Where have you got the moose? We barely got it out of Akatov. You think she went after Robert? Because he might need help. Christina frowned, because it sounded so fantastic. You live as long as I have. Sebastian winked. You'll believe in more than that. If you do. I don't know, but Nada's been weird lately, that's for sure. She's been going out at night, silly girl. The snowmobiles stopped near a couple of tall pine trees that had grown so close to each other that they'd become intertwined with the trunks. See, over there, John pointed ahead, where the darker is the dense, naked, gloomy thicket of bushes. That's where the house is. That's how I got the people. He patted himself on the shoulder. There is a weapon, but I will not use it. Clearly, it's a restraining device. Let's say, to keep this lunatic from coming at us. It's loaded. Careful, asked Christina. In our village, hunters don't walk otherwise. Without a smile, John replied. We not only have wolves here, but if you go farther away, you can also come across a bear on a lynx. Christina moved closer to Noah as if unconsciously fearful of you. If we get out, I will never go into the wilderness. I'll be in the city all the time. Noah smiled at her. The city is statistically just as dangerous. And me, he added, I love nature. My parents have a chalet in the mountains. We spend every New Year's Eve there. True, Christina smiled back and flapped her eyelashes. And how is it in Switzerland in general? Beautiful. Oh, Christopher wrinkled his nose and turned to John on the sea. Grown-ups go straight to love, as if there are no other interesting things in the world. So let's get down to business, strictly and loudly urged everyone to pay attention. John, the doctor, and I will go first. Christina, hang on, behind with the boy. Oh, sorry. Generously, he winked at Bora. With Christopher Ivanovich. Not freaking out, not in a hurry. Everyone went quietly. They didn't know what to expect, and they were quite surprised that when they approached the house, it seemed as if no one was in it, or there was a fence once outlining. The yard had long since rotted away. The house itself, despite the good brickwork, gave the impression that it might collapse and fall apart at any moment. John, stepping forward, cautiously approached the windows, peered through them, and waved his hand, saying, "You may approach." Then, walking cautiously around the house, he went up on the porch and knocked on the door. Silence. Strange, Noah said. Maybe he's not here anymore. Maybe he decided to settle somewhere else. Or what? Or he didn't have time to finish, because from inside the house came a sound, a muffled, suppressed, full of agony groan. "Let me," John, putting his hand on the door, gently pushed it open. It was not locked. Then, taking a flashlight from his belt, turned it on and initiated inside. Inside the house had managed to stand everything, but it was clear. Not so long ago, a fireplace had been stoked here, or rather, a fire had been built in what was left of the fireplace in the entrance hall of the house, and the room that opened right behind it was in disrepair. But it was also clear that a man had lived here. Some of the dust had been wiped off. There was a relatively new mattress on the floor and some food on the table by the window. Kevin called out to Noah quietly, but with amazement, and the small company rushed to one corner of the room, where what they had at first taken for a mountain of old rags turned out to be a man who had plunged into anything, apparently putting on all the clothes he had. Noah didn't remember his patient's face well because he had been working at another clinic for the past few years. But now, having finally met the man whose face he had seen in a recent journalist's program, he realized it was definitely him. And in general, Dr. Steele had never been one of those psychiatrists who confidently made a diagnosis on first impression. But now, looking at this man, he could tell Kevin was sick, and the insanity of his former patient was now far more severe than what he and his colleagues had encountered when they had tried to treat the same man in the Swiss clinic. Kevin sat back into a sort of pathetic tangle and wrapped his arms around himself. His gaze darted hysterically from side to side. He looked as if through the people who had come in and whispered something. What he was muttering, Christopher asked, "Should I punch him?" The bastard decided to take the apartment. "I can understand your anger." Noah literally intercepted the already raised fist of the teenager, but right now you have a sick man in front of you. He doesn't even seem to be aware of the reality around him. And as for his speech, the doctor frowned. He seems to be afraid of the wolf. Yes, he says the wolf comes at night and dances around the house. He says the forest rejects his former master and wants to destroy him. "I don't understand," frowned John. "And just yesterday, this psycho was bragging about how cool he was. And now he's sickening to look at. He's a miserable man, and he looks like a complete psycho. We have such a character in our village, Vaska. When he's on a white fever, he's more normal. Kevin, can you hear me?" Noah, taking a miniature flashlight out of his pocket, shone it into the eyes of the former ambitious sect leader. "He's not well at all. I don't understand what could have changed his condition so dramatically. The human psyche, it's incredibly complex and malleable. But he needs to be admitted to a regular hospital immediately. He's clearly hypothermic and dehydrated. And of course, we need to contact the local psychiatrists. I'll tell them what happened to him during his treatment with us. And from there, he'll be their concern. John and Noah, with a shoulder to lean on, got him out of the house. Then they began to decide how to drive the snowmobiles back with some problematic load, but somehow they squeezed and accommodated him. Robert decided he'd had enough. He felt disgusted. He had pushed his wife into the arms of madness, and now he was powerless. He couldn't save her and left it to others. A few hours spent in the gatehouse, when he barely managed to start a fire. It was good that he found matches in his pocket. This Sebastian's grandfather had given him when they were going into the woods. Those few hours had proved to be the perfect time to think hard about everything. And now Robert had had enough. John swung the door open with determination and stepped outside. "Nada," he shouted, "I don't know why you don't like me so much, but I'm sorry, but I'm not afraid of you. And if you want to attack me, go ahead, but I'm still going after my wife." The last words Robert barely whispered over the rustling of bodies, because he nearly fell over immediately, because right in front of him, with one hand down on the beast, stood Wendy with her hair shot up in crumpled clothes, and with Wendy's eyes glittering feverishly. Robert swallowed hard. Suddenly, he remembered the legends and tales of the spirits of the forest that could take on different guises. "Wendy, I didn't cheat on you. I swear. I didn't do anything with Christina. I couldn't. Wendy, darling." The words came pouring out. Robert felt like he was in a dream. She was real. He was real. But as Wendy stepped toward him, the snow softly crunched beneath her feet, and then she threw herself at him tightly, hugged him tightly, and sobbed. He hugged her back. "Everything will be all right," Robert said. And there was nothing else he wanted to say right now. Questions and answers, explanations and confessions and promises, and forgiveness could and would have to wait. And now it was time to get out of the woods, and without mittens, Robert said. "Lost, yes," smiled Wendy as she ran away from the ghosts of the past. "Did you lose it too?" "Yes," nodded Robert as he ran away from the wolf. "Isn't that a dog?" Wendy's eyes widened. "A nice, kind dog." "Yeah," hummed Robert. Wendy looked with interest at the Nada, who suddenly turned and asked to go somewhere behind the trees. Then she stopped and turned around, as if inviting people to follow her, and they followed. And now Robert was no longer afraid. Wood crackled peacefully in the fireplace, and the amber ruby flames filled the room warmly and cozily with furniture and Christina. Robert and Wendy sat on the rug in front of the fireplace, staring into it and silent. A snowstorm had developed outside the window. Since the day they had met in the woods and Nida had led them out, it had been exactly a year. And what kind of year had it been? It was a magical 12 months that their lives changed forever. Yes, when the initial emotions subsided, they had a serious conversation. Robert confessed that he had an affair on the side and was ready to accept any decision of his wife, and even expected that there would be a divorce. After all, he was well deserving of it. But Wendy said she wanted to give them a second chance and try to start over. But back in those days, Robert and Wendy were concerned about more than just their relationship. They had many other issues to work out. So Wendy told about what had happened then in the abandoned house between her and Kevin. And it turns out they were just talking about the magnet. A strange beggarly fascination. This kind of return to the past quickly left Wendy, and she wanted to leave. But Kevin was against it. He demanded that she stay. He said she was certainly too old for him, but he had no intention of letting her go. Wendy, in those moments, already suddenly realizing what a mistake she had made, fell into a strange state. It was as if she had relived the horror and confusion that had seized her 10 years ago, when she had been rescued from the captivity of that madman. Stephen, by this time, was gone. This man in general quickly realized how misguided he had been in his supposed teachers and guides, to oneness with the natural world. And when Wendy and Kevin were finally alone, they were talking. And somehow it happened that the thread of the conversation, figuratively speaking, was suddenly in Wendy's hands. Wendy suddenly starts yelling at Kevin and saying how much she hates him. So he broke her life. She told how much it had cost her to feel human again, how she had tried to start a normal family, to live a normal life. I made a mistake then. I let you break me, Wendy screamed. And now how come? I thought I was alone. And you're the only one who can help me, but you can't. You're nothing but a worthless old fool. You're a madman. They were talking at the window of the old house, and suddenly Nada appeared outside the window. Kevin began to convince Wendy that she was wrong, because here is an example in the forest. There are wolves, scary beast, and only he, Kevin, can protect her from them. Wolves? Wendy laughed. It's just a dog. Wolves don't look like that. What are you? An old madman? You've never seen a real wolf. An argument ensued, and Wendy said she would go right out to the animal and not do anything to it. Kevin begged her not to, but Wendy came out of the house, saying it was just a dog from the village. Probably let it off the chain. So she ran in here, and when she freely stood in front of Nada and stroked her behind the ear, Kevin broke down. After that, Wendy went back into the house. She decided to wait until morning because it was already night, and they talked again, or rather, Wendy talked. She talked about her life, about how she had tried to find happiness, how wrong she had been, unable to build a decent relationship with her husband. Anyway, it was a very long monologue. She just needed to vent. So you're saying that Kevin, that he's lost his mind? I mean, he's completely freaked out just because my wife talked to him. Noah, Robert asked in amazement. Dr. Steele replied that the mind of a madman like Kevin has a bizarre structure. And yes, apparently, he just couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand the fact that his victim had grown stronger after years, had started to live a normal life. And even now, having come to him again and voluntarily, suddenly found the strength to resist his influence. After all, before that, all those whom Kevin had allowed close to him, they had obeyed him. And it should not have been ruled out, by the way, that he was abandoned by another man, Stephen. Basically, Kevin was shattered by the fact that he realized he had lost his power over people. He's not the same person he used to be, and he couldn't take that kind of humiliation from himself. Robert and Wendy would have wanted to stay out of it, but they watched what happened next and breathed a sigh of relief when they learned that Kevin had ended up in an insane asylum, but not in Switzerland. Stephen, by the way, managed to successfully revoke the deed of gift. He just took it with him when he left Kevin and burned it. Christina apologized to Wendy and soon quit the firm, moved to another city and later sent word, met a man there and married. Noah, on the other hand, returned home to Switzerland where he continued his practice. Before that, he talked to Wendy and expressed his admiration for the fact that, despite such a difficult past, she had found the strength to move on and fight for her happiness. But the highlight of the last year was when Wendy managed to get pregnant. Doctors said that it is a quirk of the body, in which something has adjusted itself. And now Robert and Wendy were enjoying a vacation in one cozy country holiday home. They were looking at the fire, holding hands, and just being happy. They were very happy.